We're back in session from our 10-minute break. Next item of business is a work session, solar energy
Excuse me,
facility.
we need the consent agenda, Mr. Chairman.
Consent agenda.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir, Mr. Doherty.
I move adoption of the consent agenda.
And what's on that this time is the matter that the health director spoke to you about, the health department patient fees eligibility and bad debt write-offs. This is a very minor change that was recommended by the Board of Health, and your request that the DOT consider adding Olive Lane to the state maintenance system. This is DOT has to make that decision, but the individuals on Olive Lane have requested that you send it forward to DOT with your blessing.
What's the pleasure of the board? I mean, we have a motion on the floor. Any comments? Pleasure of the board. All in favor, show of sign of right hand. Motion carries. Now we'll get to the work session. On solar energy facilities, Mr. Price.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
What you've got before you is a, from the, myself and the planning board, where we've talked about it, proposed regulations on solar energy facilities, and we're going to try and avoid the use of the term solar farms. Kevin Johnson asked us from Cooperative Extension if we could avoid the use of the word farms, because he didn't see where they were actually growing anything on the property. Save the word farms where they actually are producing crops or livestock. So we're calling these places solar energy facilities. We've had a few coming up in the county already. We've got two that are, one is in use or is under construct or completed, and three that are in various stages in the planning process. And I've given you a spreadsheet showing what the current setbacks based on their designs are for those facilities. What the proposed rules would do is two steps. One is regulate the appearance from the road of these facilities countywide, throughout the county, no matter what district it's in, if it's in the county's jurisdiction. And the other is in those areas that we do have zoning in place already, add it to the list of permitted uses in several of our zones. Currently, in the areas where we have zoned industrial or residential or agriculture or residential agriculture, these facilities are not allowed because they're not on the list of permitted uses. So what we would add to the list is permitted use in heavy industry, light industry, and airport industry. And then we have, during this process, have talked with the base engineering group and their staff and had them look at our proposals, and they are in concurrence and agreement with what is being presented to you. This is from Seymour Johnson. So what they've added in several cases here, like in the first, for example, is that it be permitted in those three zones unless it is located in an area of the county under the Seymour Johnson Airspace Control Services as defined in the 2011 ACUS report or subsequent reports. We would have it as a special use in residential agriculture 30, residential agriculture 20, and airport zone. And then a special use in all areas of the county covered by the Seymour Johnson Airspace Control Services if it's in an unzoned area. We have some areas of the county that are not in the zoned area, but are covered by height restrictions or suggestions rather from Seymour Johnson. It would be a special use in those areas. A special use requires it go to the Board of Adjustment, and this board sits as the Board of Adjustment here in Wayne County. All solar energy facilities permitted as special use would require a recommendation from Seymour Johnson before it could proceed beyond the planning board level. We would notify them of a proposed facility. When you get into the second page here under supplemental regulations, it talks about fencing, the manufacturer's notification, the design of the facility as far as appearance, the on-site power lines. They must have a driveway permit. They must not produce any light emissions, reflective or indirect, that would interfere with aircraft overhead. And they must not produce any electrical emissions or interference that would interfere with aircraft flying overhead. We would get an application from the proposed developer of the site that would show the location of the panel sizes, the fencing, the driveway access, any existing buildings on the property. We would get a note from the utility company making sure that they would actually accept this electricity that is going to be generated there. That the copy of the lease between the owner or operator of the land and the proposed developer. Then in setbacks, we are having that the improved areas, which would be the areas where the panels are themselves, be 100 feet from on the front lot line setback, 50 feet from a side lot line. The improved area should be 300 feet from the residence, school, or church, and any access roads would be 20 feet from a property line. Operation will be posted, information concerning operation will be posted on a sign at the entrance. Security would be through use of fencing and gates, and then any other conditions that may be imposed upon the developer at the time of approval by the planning board and this board. In looking at the spreadsheet that you've got, you can see we've got the first one there is listed as moorings. That's the one that's actually out on Piney Grove Road, out on the east side of Walnut Creek. You can see what they actually, that's the one that's built. Their front setback is 15 feet. There are 20 feet on the side, 20 feet on the rear. There are 230 feet to the nearest structure. And their access road is about 60 feet from their property line. The Gainey has been approved by our office.
I'm not sure that anybody has the spread. Does everybody have the spread?
You got this?
Yeah.
Okay. Gainey's has been approved by our office, and we, of course, we review these already, all of them for stormwater runoff compliance, and all of them wind up being exempt because they have all of that green space and grass area still there. The only part that's impervious is really the post where the panel sits on. The rest of it is just water running off like it normally would on the field, so it's really a non-issue. Gainey is 550 feet from the road, 75 feet on the side, 350 feet from the rear, 775 feet to the nearest structure, and their driveway is 35 feet from their property line. East Wayne is one that's going to be at the intersection of True Vine Road and 13 North. They're at the point of they're getting their driveway permit for the site now, but they'll have a front setback of about 75 feet from 13, a side setback of 75 feet, 850 feet from the rear of their property, 230 feet to the nearest structure, which is across US 13, and their driveway is about 40 feet from a property line on True Vine Road. Wayne Solar, which is one that just came in yesterday, is out on the US 70 next to the Village Green shopping area next to Walnut Creek. They'll have about 500 feet off of US 70, 15 feet on the side, 200 feet on the rear, 230 feet to the nearest structure, and 170 feet from the property line for their driveway access. So if you look at where those are, they're all over the place as far as some are set way back off the road, some are close to the road. What we tried to do was find a number that would maybe strike a balance between those two extremes. And so what we came up with was a front setback minimum of 100 feet, the side setback of 50, a rear setback of 0, a nearest structure 300 feet, and the access road setback of 20 feet. And all of these, or most of these rather, would fit, if they were not there, this was adopted as is, would fit into the design as you got before you. Questions?
Questions for Mr. Price?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Doherty.
I called Connie yesterday and went over this with him, and I have some concern regarding this, the restrictions in regards to 100 feet off the front property line. And I asked Connie that if agriculture or someone acquired a 20-acre tract of land and went in there to actually build a structure or do something on that property, whether or not a setback was required, and the answer I got was no. There is no, if it's unzoned. And what we're doing here is basically, as we restrict this like this, we are limiting the use of the area on this land. If you are going 100 feet from the front property line, and then you got a setback from the 50 feet on the side lot line, and you've got to be 300 feet from any resident, school, or church, that, to me, I just think that there's some heavy restrictions here of the use of the amount of property that could be used for solar production on something that has no offensive odor, no offensive noise. Evidently, the site of this is not offensive in regards to reflective sun rays coming back, because from what I'm reading up here, it's saying that it would not have any reflection back to inhibit aircraft. And so I'm just wondering why we're being so restrictive on the use of properties for solar properties.
I think it's more just appearance than anything else. You know, as you mentioned in your example, an agricultural building being built, you're right, could be built right next to the highway if someone wanted to build that close. And I think those are more traditional than what we're used to seeing. This being something new, sometimes when something new comes along, whether it maybe it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when the hog farm industry was expanding, people that complained about them were the ones that you could see from the road. When they were set back off the road behind a row of trees, there may have been just as much problems if there were problems, but you couldn't see them. And I think that's when we're traveling up and down the county roads and when people are traveling through our scenic highway that we have going through Wayne County. People that are tourists coming through want to see things like they sort of expect to see them.
Well, if I could follow up on that, and I understand what your concerns are, and I'm just wondering whether or not, a couple of things here. And first of all, do point out that there's already one that's been installed that's 15 feet off the property, off the highway. But could we not at least allow an option for a screening to be placed there of landscaping or something that would shield the view from passing-by motorists on that? Maybe that might be an option. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayor.
The one out on Federline Trail,
Yes, that's in Goldsboro's jurisdiction, but I'm aware of where it is.
okay, just as a matter of discussion, it's probably set back, what, you would say, maybe 150 more?
Or more, I would say 500 feet from probably from Federline Trail, yeah.
If they were to mow that grass in front of it, you would have a clear view of it. So I don't understand what the difference is between 50 feet and 100 feet as far as the view. Because I've had a lot of people go by Federline Trail and they mentioned to me, said, man, that thing's amazing. You know, it's not an eyesore.
Right, and with where that is, being in more of an industrial or developed area, it may fit in better there at a closer setback than it would be if it was out in the more rural area. And it may be with this, in the areas in our industrial zones, the heavy industry light or airport, heavy industry does not have a setback. It may be that if we go with these setbacks that we've got here, would be in the unzoned areas. The zoned areas would have whatever setback we have in place already. We've got RA 30 may have a 40-foot setback. Light industry may have a 75-foot setback. Heavy industry has no setback, but it does require a buffer if you're next to a different kind of use. Two heavy industry uses next to each other are not gonna be a problem. But a heavy industry use across the street from a residential subdivision might be a problem. So that's where you would, the buffer that you mentioned would come into play, finding a balance between, sometimes things that would fit well in one location would not fit well in another location in the same zone because of what's already built around it. As you're trying to develop the county over time, we zone areas like in the planning process, we'd like to see it develop over time. And so something comes in and you have 1,000 acres zoned residential. In that residential area might be a spot somewhere in the middle of it, if it was surrounded by trees, it might well fit one of these and the setbacks would not be needed. I think the setbacks can be used as a starting point. I think if somebody comes in, like your example, like Fedlon Trail, that's a site that's surrounded by other industry, it's bordered by, I believe, the railroad maybe on one side, that they can ask for a variance in the setbacks because of their unique property. I think you got to have a starting point that would cover a broad swath of property and then have to look at each individual property. That's why it's a special use. That's why each one's gonna have to come, in most cases, to this board for you to approve where it's going and what the requested setbacks are. If somebody comes in, we say we want to have 100 foot off the road, they say, well, they'd like to go 75. You look at the site, you look at what's around it, in that case, 75 may work. But somewhere else, 100 may be what's needed. 500, the two that we have in here that are over 500, because they're sitting way back off the road to begin with. That doesn't mean you can't see it from the road, but you've got to, in reality, you've got to stop somewhere with your guidelines. And I think what we've got here is a reasonable starting point.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Camardi.
Mr. Price, you really hit on what it caught my eye on the information you shared with us. With the exception of the one that's 15, the other ones almost or way exceed the recommendation that you made for us. So in a way, you look at this, if they didn't come to you in the front end to say, how far should I set it? 3 of the 4 on here are in, as far as the setbacks concerned, is in the range of what has been promoted or suggested by planners. I look down at B in your recommendations. It takes me back to my serving on the Mount Olive Board. And I think the discussion was about where those internet buildings or something could be placed. And, you know, that discussion was, down there was about keeping these things a certain distance from schools, churches, and other residences. So, as I look at this, most of these regulations are somewhat in line with other kinds of regulations that fit other things. But just to look at your sheet, Gainey and Wayne Solar, they are, and I'm just sort of trying to get inside the minds of the folks who did this. They put them back probably where they thought would be less intrusive to maybe the public or any other thing that would be happening. And we're not, I don't think this board, any other board, is out to harm the use of a person's personal property, but that's just the nature of what life is throughout life. Most things are regulated in some fashion, and it's usually done for the good of the public. And when you look at these recommendations, I don't think that 100-foot setback and 50 from the side, I don't think those are being punitive to the person use of his land. Of course, now, if you went looking for a new piece of land to use, these regulations would help you decide whether or not you want to buy that new piece of land or not, and therefore you would not have invested your money in something and then come up later on and find that when you came to get some permit use, it was just so far out of line. So like having speed limit on the road that says 55, you know, you gotta have something to go by. So I think this is a happy, medium, if you will.
One thing on the one that, with the example that you used, with the borings, it is 15 feet. The fencing on that and the way where the panels are is not perpendicular, parallel with the highway. If you will, the highway is like this, their fencing is like this. So on the end where it's closest, it's 15 feet. When it gets down at its widest point, it's about 200 feet from the road. So if they had, in theirs, if they had run their fencing parallel with the road, starting on the furthest end, they would have been 200 feet off the road, but they could have been 100 feet off the road and had the same number of panels just by running their fencing parallel with the road.
Mr. Mayor. These solar businesses should not be any more regulated than any other business in Wayne County. That's my concern, is that we need to allow this business or these businesses to utilize their property to the maximum. And so that's my concern. If we overregulate these, are we being fair? If we are we being fair to solar energy people? Are we being fair in our regulations that we're talking about? We're talking about setbacks and so forth, but I think from what I'm reading here, one of the things that really bothers me is that we are requiring perimeter fencing for a business, and my question is that if we require that, is there a reason? Is there a problem of a shock hazard if somebody walks through there? And if we decide to do this, are we gonna say somewhere down the road, hey, you know, you guys have got a 300-acre cotton field out here, that the burrs on that cotton prick people's fingers, or are you gonna have to fence it? What I'm saying is, do we have a reason for doing this? Putting these, what I consider over-regulations of use of that property?
Well, with the fencing, of course, you have inside where the solar panels are, you have, I guess they're inverters or whatever they're called. It's where the panels send their energy to, and then it's converted there goes to the electrical grid. And those are the areas that you could potentially have a shock hazard if someone were to tamper into those type of devices, not so much the panels themselves, but where they join together and then go from there to the electrical grid. As far as the use of the property and saying and limiting the use, this being a new thing that's come along in the past year or two, and you probably need to ask David Ward to get the most sure answer on this, on how these will affect adjoining property. You know, it may be that if you're out there and you've got your home, you've got a nice place out there, you've been paying your property tax out there for years, and now the person beside you, because they have the right to use their land as it's their land, comes in and builds up within 15 feet of your property line, and now the value of your home drops by $50,000. Is the increase on the solar farm side gonna go up enough to where in the end, the taxpayer's not, you know, bearing the cost because, you know, you've decreased the value of one man's property, at the same time you've added on the others?
But I don't have a problem with the screening of trees and shrubs and so forth. I don't really think that a fence around a 50 or 75 acre site is cost effective as far as the business is concerned.
And of course, and you may well be right, but I've not seen one go up yet that did not have a fence around it by their own choice. I don't think any of these facilities are really and realistically going to put anything up like this without a fence around it.
The one on Fedline Trail did not have one when they first set it up. I don't know if it's there now or not, but it did not when they first set it up.
And you're right, I haven't looked at it close enough, so I don't know.
Mr. King?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I say anything, I want to make sure that everyone understands that I'm opposed to rules and regulations. We've got enough of that in our state, certainly, and I see that on the MC, and the rules and regulations, yes, we have to have rules and regulations, but how far do we go to ruling one people's property with something that we are, as commissioners, going to say they can and can't do with their property? That's, we want to make sure that's out. Now, let's get down to some questions. The comment on the improved areas shall be at least 300 feet from any residence. And I caught what you said about building up next to someone else's property line, but those residents are on those property lines, they do have their own setbacks. But this is a private issue when you're dealing with people's residence. If you have a farm and a residence and a fellow wants to go out there and put a solar farm, he maybe not want it to be 300 feet from his residence. He may want it to be the maximum he can get out of it. Yeah, or, let me stop and get into the weeds a little bit. Are they buying this property or are they leasing the property? In all
What
of
I've
these cases.
seen, that the developers are leasing the property.
Okay.
And then this would be 300 feet from a residence on someone else's property.
Well, it doesn't say that. It just says improved areas shall be at least 300 feet from any residence,
Right.
school, or church. And that, I circled residence because residence is private. These people are private people, private owners, they pay their taxes, and you're regulating something that they may want to put on their farm, next to their farmhouse, and that's just where they want to live. School and churches are another matter. Yes, that is public. And we're protecting the public here, and I can understand that. So it's going to be good to have a public hearing so we can hear the public input as we go forward. On the top of page 2, under D, the design of the solar energy facilities shall use materials, colors, textures, screening, and landscaping. I know of several instances in Goldsboro and even in the county that landscaping has become a hindrance. I know we're going green. I know we try to do the best we can with our paths and walking paths and biking paths. And the comprehensive land use plan was put together back in, I believe, 6 or 7, 8, somewhere in there. Defines that pretty good as far as landscaping. But when you're telling these people that are wanting to lease these properties from these owners of agricultural land in general, unzoned, if they're just out there and these companies come in and they say, this is perfect, we want to do this with your property, and we want to lease it, how much are they going to go in and expense that going into that? Upfront cost that generally would be in the neighborhood of 2 to 3%, and then all of a sudden you've created such a regulatory part of this that it's up to 10 or 12 or 15%, and that just leaves a bad taste in their mouth and they go somewhere else. There goes the farmer or the landowner that has the property, that he loses that potential income for his grandchildren and his family. Something that may be of land that it doesn't produce very well. The crops don't produce very well, and they may want to use it for this. That is, I guess, a start to some of the notes that I have made on this. I do appreciate the planning board putting, I know a lot of thought has gone into it. But I look forward to the public hearing and hearing what the public has to say. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman.
I think Mr. Camardi was.
Well, I just want to throw one small little part in there. In terms of safety and those things related to that, I was just sitting there trying to remember if I saw any of those power stations that Duke and all those other companies have, that they do not have some kind of fence around it. I believe those things are usually enclosed by some kind of a fence, so as to protect the property, but also to protect children from wandering in or unsuspecting folk from being in those areas without due cause. I think the solar facilities is so new that we need to err on the side of safety until some point somebody can determine that it just doesn't need to have any kind of fence and protection. But all those power stations and things that I've seen is owned by the big power companies. They have something around them to keep the public from wandering in and out. I may stand to be corrected, but I just don't remember seeing it. Safety. First. Thank you.
Mr. Doherty?
I share the concern of cost, of competitiveness, what our regulations would require on the part of the solar companies coming to Wayne County. I'm concerned about the fact that we would require it. If it is required from the standpoint of the company, or if it is a safety issue, because we don't know whether or not it's a safety issue. We are adding additional costs in regards to screening, landscaping. We are limiting the use of properties by the fact of the distances, whether or not it's the setback or the distances away from residences. So with all those things in mind, I think what I would prefer, in fact, I'm gonna make a motion that we table this, send it back to the planning board for them to come back with a less restrictive, proposal. And I make that in form of a motion.
Could I ask you to hold your motion for just 1 second? Well, I mean, that might not be but I want to ask Mr. Price one question. Is that out?
We have a motion on the floor. Let me,
All right.
before we vote on it, we'll have a comment section. You
All
can
right,
ask your
okay,
question.
thank you.
I have a motion on the floor. Is there any comments?
Yes.
Mr. Martin?
Mr. Price, specifically, what were you wanting us to do today versus tabling it? What were you coming, would you?
I would
please
like for
repeat
y'all to
again?
just to schedule a public hearing.
All right, that's what I thought was, and that,
It would be actually a two-part public hearing. One would be amending the current zoning ordinance that we have to add this to the list of permitted uses. The other would be adopting a standalone ordinance that would cover the remainder of the county. And the,
that's what I was trying to accomplish, was just what he.
Mr. Mayor?
Well, the solar energy facilities, I still have an issue, with the fencing for this. And I think we need to go to a public hearing, but I've got a problem with that, and I want to express my opinion on it, is that in 15 to 20 years, ever how long these leases are, if it reverts back to, say, farming, most of these fences are gonna have to come down, because you can't turn a 50-foot wide tractor around with a fence at the end of your field. And so, I just think it's gonna be a discouragement to solar energy facilities to even consider us if another county next to us. And that's one of the things I want to mention. I'm wondering if we could maybe take a look at our neighboring counties and see if anyone has done anything. Because in order for us to be competitive, we got to be competitive with them. If they're offering something better than we are, then they're going to get all the solar facilities unless we don't want them. Are we saying that we don't want them? I don't think so. But maybe we're over-regulating to the point that we won't be competitive. And so, I'm for having the public opinion, but I just have some heartburn with restricting the property owners to this degree without seeing what other counties are doing.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. King?
The basis of the planning board is to do exactly what they've done, is go through this process and have the planning director come before us. They've done the best they can do. They've studied this long-term. I've talked to several of them and talked to our planning director, and they've done a great job getting it to this point. Now it's time for the people to speak up. The planning board has done very, very well, and I keep repeating that. They brought, and that's what they're designed to do, is do the study, bring it to us. I'm not wanting it to go back to the planning board. I think they've done their job. I think it needs to go to the public now, and then hear the public and what they've got to say. They're the citizens, they're the landowners, they're the people that are out there farming their properties and trying to do what they can for their families. So let's get the public now to the podium and have a public hearing. Then we take it and we can say, you know, planning board, I thought of this, these things came up, we didn't think of those things. Everybody, 7 people don't know everything. That's why the citizens are involved. So, Mr. Chairman, I would certainly like, and I'm not gonna amend your motion, Mr. Daugherty, send it back, or even have a public hearing. I think what we've got before us today is to have a public hearing, like Mr. Price has indicated, and move forward with that, to get the public's opinion and get their knowledge to the table. And then if it takes it getting back to the planning board, we'll do it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
One final thought, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Mayor.
I would like to know from someone that is an expert at solar energy facilities, what is the hazard? What is the shock hazard? How much, what degree is it? Is it something like I said, unless one's been put up recently, and when I say recent, over the last month, there was not a fence around the one on Federline Trail. As a matter of fact, when they first put it up, they had some guards sitting there in vehicles that were watching the facility. I'd like to know what that hazard is, if someone can tell us. I'd like to know.
Right, I can check on that.
Would you please?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else? Mr. Daugherty.
I will withdraw my motion to table this and have a public hearing on it with the understanding that, I certainly feel like that's too restrictive and do not want anyone to feel as if I am complicitly approving with these recommendations prior to the public hearing. So I withdraw my motion.
Mr. Chairman, in regards to what Mr. Daugherty just said and Mr. King was saying, I think, having the public hearing probably would be the right thing to do, because, as Mr. King said, there may be comments made at the public hearing that the planning board might not have been privy to. It may be after the public hearing, then you would want to send it back to the planning board for them to take into account what was said at the hearing, whenever you have a hearing, a month from now or whenever. And I think Mr. Parker had something he wanted to add to that.
If you're having a public hearing to determine whether to establish a new ordinance, as he says, a standalone, as well as to change the ordinance, it would be, in my opinion, necessary to have the actual changes before you so the public would know how the ordinance is being changed. This, I think, was, when this was first sent to the commissioners to discuss it, I think that the board asked that there be a work session to discuss it so that the planner and the planning board would have an idea of what the Board of Commissioners wants. I think clearly, based on the work session today and the discussions that have been taking place, the planner knows the different perspectives of the board, and the planning board will know that, and then an actual amended ordinance, amendments to the zoning ordinance and the standing alone ordinance would come back before you to set a public hearing on those two things.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. King.
We have discussed this for 50 minutes, and we have brought out all of what has been put for us, I feel like, and the commissioners have asked some great questions. I'd like to make a motion that we go ahead and set a public hearing so we can go further in knowing what to do in the future with this system. If we have to get it back before the planning board, so be it. If it comes back to us, whatever. But I think it's time to go ahead and set the public hearing. We've worked on it long enough. They've done a great job. I'd like to make a motion that we just go ahead and have a public hearing.
I have a motion on the floor. Any other discussion?
Do you want to set the time and place, date?
And I would suggest, Mr. King, based on with Mr. Parker's workload that we have right now. Normally, we set a public hearing about a month out. I was to say 6 weeks in this case, just to give Mr. Parker and myself time to work on getting the ordinance that we would advertise.
Second meeting in February.
Okay.
9:15.
Yes, sir.
We have a motion on the floor that we have the public hearing, the second meeting in February at 9:15. Any other discussion?
Question, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Carter?
Is it my understanding if we modify this proposal after the public hearing, we would have to have another public hearing that would incorporate the changes that would be made?
No, sir, you would not.
Would
because
not?
What Mr. Price has said, that there will be a specific document that, on which the public hearing is being held.
Which would be possibly this one or a modified one.
Yes, sir.
And at that point, after the public hearing, then we may or may not change that. If we make changes to the proposal, would we have to have another public hearing?
No, sir. What is before you today is just the recommendations, and what will be before the public hearing will be an actual amendment to the existing zoning ordinance, and then a standalone ordinance, which will be in a little different format from just this. And once you have the public hearing, the board can always adopt something that is modified from what was before the public hearing after you hear what the public's got to say.
Okay, appreciate the clarification. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other discussion?
One thing I did pick up on that I will make a change from the memo is that to clarify what maybe Mr. King said, on a residence, it will be 300 feet from a residence on adjoining property. We will add that in.
Any other discussion? A motion on the floor. All in favor, show or sign of right hand. Motion carries unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Next item of business in the work session is, discuss the, contract with Radio Communications over the, upgrading our, radio and communication system in the county. Before we get started, I would, just want to clarify one thing with Mr. Parker. We've already had a resolution that has been passed unanimously by the board, and a budget amendment was approved by the board, also unanimous. And, but in fairness to all the commissioners, I do not have a problem with discussing this in the work session. So, the work session is open for any additional questions to the RCC contract with radio system in Wayne County.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bell.
Since we have discussed this radio system time and time again, why don't we just go ahead and discuss the contract that we asked Mr. Parker to go out and deal with? We've already discussed the radio. We already discussed what we're gonna do with the radio. So I can't see rehashing that again. Let's talk about the contract and move on.
Well, I think that's the purpose in putting it on the work session, is to discuss the contract. In the initial, resolution, we were, waiting for Mr. Parker's, approval, and it's taken quite a bit longer than I had anticipated to, get the approval of Mr. Parker. But he has, looked at it, and it's been redone, 6 or 7 times, and, but I think that's the purpose of this work session and adding this on, is to, discuss the contract. Mr. Parker.
And I'll try to answer any questions. I understand that Commissioner Pate and Commissioner Keene both had several legal questions, and Joe Gurley and his staff are here to answer, I hope, the technical questions that I, quite frankly, don't have the ability to do that. But they are satisfied with the technical parts, they tell me, as is the consultant that the county has hired to help us get through this.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Pate.
and I'm trying to find exactly where it is in here, but it's about the performance security as opposed to the bond. And it's somewhere in there, and I read this, that it appears to me as we, have this system go in place, it reduces the amount of their liability down to where at the end, they're only, it's about $300,000 or whatever, at 10% of it is of the total price. Does that not allow them to sort of, kind of one-sided? Can you explain that, how that works, please?
Where's that?
And I'm trying to find it.
Is it on page 6?
The total liability is the
Yes.
total contract price, and that is not unusual at all in any contract when somebody is selling you something or putting something in. On Schedule D, if that is something that we might look at, and that's probably about a third of the way down and that's the payment schedule. When the contract is signed, there will be a 25% payment to them. There's a 50% payment as they deliver all of the equipment. There is a subsequent 15% as they are when the installation of all the equipment is there. Then there is a field acceptance test for the last 5%, and then a final 5% when the coverage acceptance test. Those tests are defined in the contract documents and the exhibits, and the consultant and the staff are satisfied with those tests that are set out. When 90% of the contract has been completed, the performance bond will go from 100% to 10% of the performance bond. You've already had the county will have accepted and said what is here is complete and we're satisfied with it as those timeframes are met. The Exhibit C shows you when they expect, from the time the contract is signed and they start working, when they expect things will be completed. So I do not think that the county is at risk by those provisions in the contract.
So that's a typical type thing in a performance security bond?
It's not necessarily typical with the performance bond. A lot of times if you're say building a building, your performance bond would stay at 100% until the building is complete. But by constructing this update to the system and what they're putting in it, I do not think that it will hurt the county.
I was just concerned that, if it got to the very end and turn the switch on and it just really didn't work, are we gonna be holding the bag on this thing?
Well, I don't think so, and I think that Mr. Powers and Mr. Gurley, Mr. Taylor can explain a lot better, but the equipment that is being bought is going to be tested to make sure, well, first of all, they have engineered the upgrade to what you've got, and that was explained by Mr. Brody from the RCC at a previous meeting of yours. Once that has been accepted by the board, that would be something that the board has agreed would be satisfactory for an upgrade. The equipment that is actually going to be purchased from the Harris Corporation to complete the upgrade, it's my understanding that each piece of that equipment is checked out and checked out to see if it works at Harris up in Virginia before it is shipped to Wayne County. Now, and everybody recognizes that sometimes something might work in Virginia that doesn't work once it gets here. But once it gets here and gets installed, that's when you go into the field acceptance test to see if it is in fact working where it's placed in Wayne County. And that is in the last 10%. The last 5% is the coverage acceptance test, which is defined, I think, on the second or third page of the contract. It's the second page down at the bottom in paragraph 2.11 for in-building coverage. And our end users have been complaining about the in-building coverage that the current system is not providing. And this is, as I say, Mr. Powers can come up and explain the definition. I can read it to you, but he can explain it to you.
He would.
Good morning.
Good morning, man.
And what we're looking at with in-building coverage, when we talk about in-building coverage, we're looking at a certain decibel rated building, and we're looking at a neg 8 dB building. That would be your ordinary type construction, your residential houses, 1-2-story houses. That would be what they consider a neg 8 dB building. In-building coverage is not the hospital, is not the jail. It would be your ordinary construction, your 1- and 2-story residential structures.
Mr. Chairman, could I follow up on that questioning?
Mr. Daugherty?
Yes.
I would too. Mr. Chairman.
Am I understanding you to say that going from the outside to inside of a regular stick-built home, that there's only an 8 decibel point drop
Yes.
of noise? Or are you talking about something else?
Signal,
Signal.
RF signal.
Okay, so we're talking about
RF
signal, we're not
yes.
talking about
We're talking about
decibels.
signal, we're talking about RF radio frequency signal, which is measured in dB or decibel ratings.
Decibel rate.
Well,
So,
see, so,
from-
but it also sound is registered in decibels, is that
Yes.
right?
Yes, sir.
So that's where I was confused.
Yes, sir. We're talking
Because
about
there's
radio
a lot
frequencies.
more than a 8 decibel point drop when you go from the outside to the inside of a residence.
Yes, sir. We're talking about RF or radio frequency.
Okay, radio frequencies. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Man,
I wanted to follow up on that for a minute. So what I'm reading here in this 2.11, am I correct in saying that hospitals, office buildings, and medium-sized stores, including the jail, we won't have any inside to outside communication?
No, I think what it's saying is that would be more than that neg 8 dB loss.
Right, which means you will not have communication.
It means they're not gonna guarantee coverage
Okay.
in those areas.
That's what I have a problem with, because if someone's in that jail being attacked by an inmate and they need some help from outside, they're not gonna be able to call anybody. My question is this, is that the last sentence of that paragraph, it says, this is what bothers me a little bit, is that the in-building coverage will not be specifically tested, but the signal level as measured during automated testing will be no less than the minus 104 decibel per milliwatts required to provide adequate signal for 8 dB building loss. So what they are saying here is that it will actually not be field tested on the field with someone inside of a building and somebody actually making a call from inside to outside. They're saying it's gonna be done all automated. Is that correct?
The first part of the testing, which is called a Burr test or a bit error rate test, because you have to remember, this is a digital system, it's not analog.
Yeah.
So that is what they'll call it an automated test, they call it a drive test, we call it a Burr test or a bit error rate.
Right.
That is automated. That is the first test that's done, and it gives us a little bit of information about the digital signal. And it will be rated from 0 on up. Once we finish that, standards show us that if the bit error rate is better than 2, so if it's from 0 to 2, there, you should have no issues whatsoever. From 2 to 5, or 2.1 to 5, it's good. We need to do what we call the DAQ, or the audio test. If it's over 5.1, then it's a fail, automatic fail. The bit error rate says you cannot talk. So anything between 2.1 and 5, we will go out, 3 county employees, 2 vendor employees, and do what we call the DAQ, or the audio quality test, which means we'll have somebody in the field with a radio and somebody in the dispatch center, and they will repeat a sentence. We got 4 or 5 sentences that they will repeat, and then both will score with the scale that we have, the quality of audio. So we'll have 3 county employees scoring it, and we'll have 2 vendors scoring it. So anything under or less than over 2 on the Burr test, they will be a audio test from portable to dispatch.
Okay, will that be done after the field acceptance test or before?
After. The field acceptance test is an equipment test. It's not a coverage test. So, like Mr. Parker was saying, there will be a field acceptance test in Lynchburg, Virginia. When Harris finishes our equipment, they will stage it in Lynchburg. And we will go up there and do a field acceptance test in Lynchburg, Virginia with Harris. And it's a very thick document. We go through each little bit of it. When we finish and we say, yes, everything's working, the field acceptance test passes in Lynchburg, everything comes to Wayne County, they set it all back up, and then we do a field acceptance test. Same thing we did in Lynchburg, Virginia, we do it here in Wayne County to ensure that all the equipment is working right and all the equipment is talking like it's supposed to. That is the field acceptance test. That's for the equipment. Once it passes and we know all the equipment is working perfect, then we start on the coverage acceptance test, that's when we start doing the Burr test, and then we'll start doing the DAQ, or the audio quality test, to make sure that the coverage is like it's supposed to be.
Okay, now, that's where I have a question is that the performance bond, by that time, RCC's liability is only 10% of the total project. If, when you do your field test and or your coverage test, and everything does not work, my concern here is that RCC is only responsible for $300,000 and some change. So that's why I'm saying, and I'm recommending, that the performance bond be in force, full force, until the project is ended. And there's no reason we can't do that, as far as what I can understand. And so I think that RCC's liability needs to be there all the way to the end. If you remember, and of course Joe Gurley and all of us have been involved in this for a couple of years, that the previous issue we had was that after everything was accepted and everything then was put in full force, all the radios and everything were put in force in the county, nothing worked. So when a company has no money owed to them, all they gotta do is turn around and walk away. I want to see something on this contract, and I'm not being overcritical here. What I'm doing is I'm taking exactly what the News Argus editorial called us out to do yesterday, is to make sure that we as commissioners get it right. And I want to ask some questions to make sure that we do our part to make sure it is right. Because as the News Argus editorial said, the people are watching. And so I'm not doing this just to make a spectacle of myself. I want to know that some of the ins and outs that I've learned during hanging around with you and Joe Gurley all these years. You know, I've learned a little bit. So what will we need to do with this system? And one of the notes I made, what will we need to do, or if there's anything we can do to get it to talk in a jail or hospital? Is anything that can be done?
There are things that can be done. There's things they call BDAs, or bidirectional amplifiers, that are put into buildings. There's a lot of counties and cities that have that in their ordinance, that if, say, certain square footage, certain type building, before it gets a permit to build, they have to do this so they can have coverage inside, which they call BDAs. There are things that can be done. Now, as far as building a radio system that would give you all that coverage, I don't know of any radio company that'll tell you that. Well, they can, but it'll have a price tag on it.
Well, I would like to see us at some point, if we can get past this initial phase, I would love to see all of our OES people, emergency services people, everybody, sheriff, I'd like for them to be able to talk anywhere in any building except for a bank vault, and there's exceptions here, x-ray rooms. I'd love for them to talk to any place in the county.
And I promise you, we would love that too.
Yeah.
We would love that too.
Excuse me, Mr. Camardo.
Go ahead,
From
please.
what information that I've been provided, Wayne County cannot afford it. We don't have enough money in the bank and can't borrow that much money. Mr. Camardo.
Well, I read the same article in the newspaper, and I think I sort of understand what they're getting at. But what I was, my thought went back to, that 10%, having no more than 10% left in by the time you got to that stage. Mr. Powell, what I would be thinking, that all along the way, you all are, and I'm not talking about what was done some other time, but this time, you all will be monitoring, and I hear you saying you're gonna be following that process so close. And just the simple cost of what it's gonna take to get to that end road, I don't know what company could afford not to get some of that revenue. First, you gotta buy that stuff before you can put it together. I mean, I just never was able to, to remodel old house unless I went down there to one of them places and bought some 2x4s, so you can't get all the way to the end before you step along the way. But I think what the overriding concern is that regardless of what was done any other time, this time, we watch every step along the way. All those performances are documented. You go, because at some point, the red flag should come up, and we're expecting you to wave that red flag and say, wait a minute. What was promised is not being delivered at that 25%, 50%, 75%. Don't get out for that last 10%, that 90 point rate. Tell us along the way that something is not working the way it ought to be. Then we start to react to there. But I'm just counting on this time. The game's played this time. The other game was another game. But this time is so closely watched, and the test being done. As I read this, Mr. Parker, I was just reading down through the different performances, and I recognized in my head that when we got to that last word, it did say 10. I looked at that 10%, there's only thing left, but that's like a person building a house, and he get a draw, and at some point, it is gonna be a minuscule amount left, but you've been watching it come up all along. And if it means that you put us in a van and haul us out there to those sites and say, you see that, please. That's what I think is going to work with this.
And we have tried to put some triggers in place, such as the schedule of events, where it tells you in certain weeks we'll have certain things done. So we have tried to put some triggers to kind of keep an eye on everything that's going on.
Any other questions? Mr. Pate?
On page 9, 14.2, talk about the proprietary rights and software. Can you, Ms. Parker, can you kind of explain that a little bit? It seems like we're paying for some of this software to be developed, but we have no right to it. Who owns this exactly? I'm sorry. I'm sorry, 14.2, page 9.
RCC and Harris will own the software, just like any other software that is, when you get a license to use software. Part of the current contract you have with RCC is to maintain the system, radio system that we have. Because of the way the previous contract was operated, and the county never accepted the finality of that contract, there was no agreement with Harris to keep up the items that were there. the contract with RCC and this contract will, will see that everything that's new that Harris is making for the equipment that is being bought from Harris, that the software will be put in there and it will be maintained. And it's called, what's that called?
FX package.
FX package, thank you.
I just needed a clarification on that, because it's kind of legal language that I didn't quite understand.
And I also read that, and I was concerned, but you all are saying there'll be no point where you won't have access to the software, whether it's 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, or whatever. Is that,
That is correct.
that's, okay,
That is
that was I read that concerned me, Bill. I just wanted to make sure to hear y'all say it, that we're not gonna be frozen out or anything.
Well, now,
Bankruptcy
Just-
will.
there's always a concern that when you get into, things like this, that somebody along the line will say, we have made something that is new and we are not going to continue to keep up what you bought, but they're going to still want you as a customer, so they're going to do everything with, these programs, in my opinion, to see that you are satisfied. Talk about Harris and RCC.
Mr. King.
Okay. First of all, no one wants this, I don't think, any more than I do. I've been hammering on this for as long as they flip the switch, and dealing with the firemen in my district in particular, in District 4, and of course being at the association meetings and seeing what has happened over the last 2 years has sometimes not been very pretty. And but we're at that time that we have to move forward, as we've all agreed to. And with that, I've just got some questions, and there are the legality part, and I don't wish to get into the weeds, but there are some issues, and I'll start with one, and it might not be in the weeds, but it's something that was just mentioned about the field acceptance test in Exhibit E. I was not going to Exhibit E. I was just going to stay on the scope of work. I literally got through 10 pages of this contract and just set it down because there was so much on that. But it did, this comment just a few minutes ago about the equipment test, not the coverage test. But if I go over the coverage acceptance test, that has something to do with what I'm going to ask in just a minute. The Exhibit E, and that would be page E-2-1 under coverage area requirement. And this is under the coverage testing methodology. Because we've gone from an equipment test out of state, coming into Wayne County, and going into now the coverage testing methodology under coverage area requirement at the bottom. I won't go into those 2 bullet points, but I would like you to turn the page to the 3rd bullet point, where it says in-building coverage on page E-2-2. In-building coverage will not be specifically tested, but the signal level was measured during automated testing will be no less than -104 decimal, be required to provide adequate signal for an A decimal building loss. I just wanted to bring your attention to that, not to get into the weeds, but going back into that coverage versus the equipment test under their methodology is once we receive it, then it goes back to what a previous commissioner, or in a previous time, a commissioner noted that on page 2.11, and I'll just go through these real quickly, but I do have them listed here, and then finish up, and then if, whatever. But getting back to the hospitals, manufacturing facilities, mall, I'm specifically thinking of Wayne County. That the frequency band that we talked about and the manufacturers, you call them DBAs. I know that the 800 millihertz have repeaters made to assist in these buildings. So,
It's the same thing.
Okay.
The PDAs, they're bi-directional amplifiers.
okay, are we having repeaters a part of this at all to go in any building?
No, sir.
Okay, that's the first question, and thank you, that was my answer. Do I, page 211, at the bottom, last two sentences. Now, it was mentioned earlier, and I don't repeat here much, but I understand that in-building coverage will not be specifically tested. And I think I've got that answer.
That's correct.
This was a serious issue, I want to remind everyone, with CI. And when we got the presentation from RCC, there was a lot of talk from its owner and from its engineer about 95, and of course, in-building coverage. I think that's a lot of what I heard at the Firemen's Association meetings, really for about 9 months after they flipped the switch to go live. Here again, going live is that the research on this reduction of 10% of the contracted price, to me, is very risky. Just a reminder, of course, in my district, the Wayne County system worked, and it passed the first test. And everybody was okay with it. But as I recall, it was after all radios were installed that we found out that the system failed to perform. Now, going to 2.12 on page 3, where it says performance security. Now here it says in this contract, performance security means a letter of credit from a bank. And my concern here is that I've seen in the past is that companies go bankrupt every day, especially in this post-recession. And, you know, a guaranteed performance bond was something that I have wanted to see all along.
There will be a bond, not a letter of credit.
Okay. Then I just, again, I just saw that there and I wanted to voice my concern there. The, page 3.2. The software license, we've talked about the software license that would be RCC and Harris. And if Harris, and I think that was mentioned earlier, something that if someone walks away, but if Harris leaves, there is not in this contract an enjoined contract, just only warranty information. There's no specifics of Harris coming to the table enjoining partnership that I have seen. And maybe it's there and I just haven't seen it, but only the warranty information from Harris. Concerned about, 10 or 15 years down the road on the equipment from Harris. Page 4.
Well, if I may respond to that.
Okay.
That is what Mr. Powers was talking about, the software FX agreement, and that would be something that the county would have to keep with Harris because the equipment is being purchased through RCC from Harris. And that's when they were talking about the tests that would be conducted up at Harris. That when that is done, you don't need the first year of the software FX agreement because that is included in the initial purchase.
Okay. The equipment that CI used, what is that? Who's the manufacturer of that equipment? Harris. Okay. That Harris equipment, how much of that Harris equipment do you think out of the total purchase hardware and software is being used by RCC?
For the enhancement, for the upgrade that we're using now?
Well, I was told by the owner of the company that basically during our presentation from RCC that basically that has been put on the shelf and some of that will be used. I'm just trying to get in my mind how much, since we're talking about Harris, are they still tied into that equipment with their warranties? And is RCC going to use that equipment? And if so, how much of it? Don't get in the weeds, I just.
Oh, okay. There is some equipment that's going to be reused for the enhanced system, and there is some equipment that is going to be as a backup system or second system to the county. The transmitters, base stations such as the Master 3s are not going to be used on a new system. Maybe the Master 5s that are used on the new system with the new LSM technology, which is going to boost us up where we need to be on some of this coverage. Some of the multi-couplers and cans we'll be reusing, but there are some transmitters, base stations we won't use, and we'll use the Alcatel microwave equipment. It's going to be reused along with the new antenna, the new microwaves we'll be putting up. So there are some that will, there's some equipment that will be reused and some that will not.
Mike, okay, thank you. My interest in bringing Harris into the picture is the last sentence on 3.2 under software license. Is that the FX agreement will contain fees and charges to be paid by county to Harris and will be for a period of 1 year and will continue on a year-to-year basis, subject to termination by the county or Harris as provided in such license agreement. I'm trying to get in my head how much Harris can get us into and then walk away, and then we be holding what Harris supposedly is responsible for.
On the FX software package, that's something we budget every year. We've been budgeting that every year since the implementation of the system we have now. Just unfortunately, with everything going on, we've never used the FX package, which with the new system, again, the first year it's going to be included, and then we'll have to budget again every year for that. As far as Harris defunking and not, I couldn't tell you. I don't think a company such as Harris is going to go away. But that is something that's required. We have to have that FX package because there are updates such as when you cut your laptop off and back on, that Microsoft software that you use, the Windows software, is proprietary. You can't go and put it on a bunch of different computers, and it's going to update every now and then.
Sure.
And that's the same thing it's going to do with this.
Right. It's subject to termination by the county or Harris, and we're getting warranty information, which is from a good company, but enjoined contractual agreements are very important to know that we are protecting ourselves all through the process. And as one commissioner said, we have recourse from year to year or any time during the year that we don't have to face the burden of paying for it all ourselves. Okay, page 4, 5.5. Change orders. About middle way of 5.5 on the change orders. And this is something in previous comments from a commissioner about watching what goes on through this process. Change orders is very important here, is the RCC will also be entitled to a change order for any cost of tower reinforcement or any of the tower sites due to the placement of new items of equipment onto existing towers and to provide additional space at the Goldsboro Tower Equipment Shelter for any cost additional tower studies beyond those contained in the scope of work. For any cost of additional tower studies beyond those contained in the scope of the work. To me, I don't know exactly what that real cost is. And that's sort of vague of moving forward on that particular sentence. Watching change orders, I understand, but do we have somebody that protects the county, an engineer, an architect, or any of this when it comes to towers? And I know you're doing a great job. Well, I appreciate all you're doing and all you have done, because I am familiar with all the work that you've put in it. I really am. Though I've not been on the scene, I'm very aware of it. But this is legality stuff here. And, you know, my part here is that I'm trying to understand today, or do I know exactly what the real cost will be, and will be in this particular sentence, keeping it in context. This seems to me to be a very open paragraph and needs more study. If they need to be resolved in the future, do we know the cost?
Can I just, we have contracted with TEP out of Raleigh, Tower Engineer Professionals. We do know, and we have known, that the tower site in Goldsboro, which is out on 8th Street behind Carly C's, has a lot of equipment on it. Not only does it have county equipment on it, it has U.S. Cellular equipment on it, and it also has the Highway Patrol equipment on it. We know that we are at 98% at that tower site. With the enhanced system, we know we're gonna have to put 2 more microwaves on there. So we were probably going to have to do some fortification to that tower. I have talked with John Gowen with TEP as recent as Friday afternoon at the office. They are doing the study now. I had budgeted for these tower studies that were approved from the commissioners for 13-14 budget years, so we have proceeded on with that. And he should have something for me this week or the first of next week. It does look promising for us, but there is a chance that we may have to either pay the money to fortify that tower or start cleaning something off of the tower itself and make some space for us. What that cost to be to fortify, he couldn't even give me an idea without doing the tower study. So they're in the process of the tower study now in the survey to let me know if there's gonna be any fortifications to that.
So we don't know the cost, if there is to be.
We do not. It could be nothing. We may be under that 105%. He feels confident we may be at that 105% capacity, which we don't have to do anything. And then maybe we just might have to do just a few little wires on it, a few legs on it, and it won't be much, he said. But you never know until they get in there and actually do that engineering study.
Okay. Page,
We're also having to do the same type study on a tower in the western part of the county that we are trying to co-locate on there. We've got to satisfy U.S. Cellular on that tower, and if there would be any requirement to do anything for that tower, that would be a county cost. We cannot tell you what that cost is until we get that study back.
okay.
But that would be the same thing, that it is what I'm told, and I understand that because that's not our tower, but if we want to co-locate on it, we're still going to have to fix it for the owner of the tower, U.S. Cellular.
Okay. And 8.1 on page 5. As you see, my questioning is more about the assurity of it working once it's switched on and we got what we paid for. It did not happen, as we know, with the previous expense of the taxpayer, and to be assured that it will happen this time. I'm really concerned about the testing methodology that this company has, that they will test something. And again, we see that system testing in 8.1, commencement of field acceptance testing. Last sentence, following passage of the field acceptance test, the parties agree that RCC's liability under this agreement will be reduced to 10% of the contract price. I really can't understand why we're reducing it to 10%. Why isn't it the $3 million that the people told us that they were going to do, and then all we start seeing these payment schedules? System final acceptance on 8.3 on page 5. I guess after reading that paragraph, again, paranoia sets in. One test and it's over. One commissioner earlier said we watch it all the way through the process. To me, what's the recourse? What's the recourse? We've got an issue now with the previous company. There's still money owed, still contractually obligated. What is our obligation when this system, the final acceptance? That's a concern of mine. The next one is 8.3.
If I may just respond.
Yes, sir.
To that was in part of the reducing the liability was part of the negotiation process. It is staff's belief and the consultant that we hired that when you get the testing, the field acceptance test complete, you know that everything is fine, and the only thing that will be left is the coverage testing that you've got to see whether or not that's it. And sometime before we finish this discussion, I want Mel to talk about this map that's up on the board, because that is what they are that's the coverage that's being guaranteed. there may be some question in some end user's mind about whether the coverage that you are buying is sufficient. Now, as I believe one commissioner has already said, you would prefer that radios would work in the hospital and the jail and everywhere except the bank vaults and x-ray places. That, I believe, the chairman has told you that the county can't afford. But it was the effort of those of us who were working with the company to make sure that the definition of the inside coverage was very clear, so everybody would know what it was. It is not going to be tested inside a building. This coverage is what our consultant has said and what Mr. Powers has described as the way that it would normally be tested.
Normally be tested.
And it's kind of like when you go out and revalue your property. You don't, the county does not go in to any place to see what's inside that unless a taxpayer has come back in and said, you've missed it completely.
Right.
Then the tax office will go back in.
Sure.
But that is not what the coverage test as described and set out here will do.
Yes, and going back just to explain earlier that I was part of the Firemen's Association when the majority of what I was hearing was a concern of in-building coverage. That is the concern of mine, and I know the concern of the firefighters, that we approach it in a way that we can assure them what will and what will not work. And doing that, if that's a scope of our work with this company, that they not come in and test the buildings, which is normally maybe something they don't do, but if taxes needs to go in a house and people want them to do that, we've done that and had the people to say, well, let the tax department go in your house. It might come out with a different appraisal. Same way here. Why not the scope of the work be concentrated on the concerns of the firefighters? Because that's the main concern going into this 2 years ago. So I understand if that's not the scope of the work, I understand. But if that's their quote, but I'm gonna do a little sidebar here. Is there anything in here that, or let me ask you this way. When they gave their presentation to us, is everything that they said in here? No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I have not looked back at the tape of exactly what they said. Everything that that has been negotiated and that the staff has said is what the county wants and what the county's consultant has said the county wants and can afford is in here. And I know that's not specifically answering your
okay.
question, but
Okay, I'd like to move on, thank you. I would like to really finish and if you just note, because I've got about 6 more and I'm over. So if you would allow me, Mr. Chairman. The, page 7, 9.5. Here, my question, will RCC step out of responsibility and bills the county? That's another concern. In the middle of 9.5, under warranty claims, again, I was going back to some of that Harris equipment that we've paid for, and if they're still having that to deal, if they're having to use some of that, that action will be full extent of RCC's liability for the warranty claim. It is understood and agreed that county will be responsible for the cost of enforcement of warranty claims against the manufacturer, which is Harris, which that's who CI use, and that's who they're using, including without limitation any legal fees or litigation costs. If RCC's investigation under this section 9.5 indicates the warranty claim is not valid, then RCC may invoice county for responding to the claim on a time and material basis using RCC's then current labor rates.
RCC, if the county maintains that that the warranty, there is a warranty problem, it will contact RCC. RCC will assist the county in trying to determine whether or not there is a warranty claim. If the county was mistaken and it wasn't a claim under the warranty, RCC expects to charge the county for its investigation of that. If RCC says that there is a claim, then RCC's not bringing the claim against whoever got the warranty. It would be the county that would have to do that. The county, if the county brings that claim, the county would ask for its cost to be part of what it recovers.
Exactly, and that's where I was going with 9.7. 9.5, it lit up at 9.7 on the disclaimer, and they were so sure of 9.7 that they capitalized every letter in that paragraph. 9.7, disclaimer of other warranties. It's a protocol, like you just talked. It's the county, the manufacturer, RCC, or it might be RCC, manufacturer, county, or it might be manufacturer, RCC, county. But in this case, it looks like to me, and what I've read here, these warranties are the complete warranties for the upgrade system, equipment, and software provided under this agreement. And they're going to be using other Harris equipment that was purchased a couple, 2 or 3 years, 2 years ago. RCC disclaims all other warranties or guarantees expressed or implied, including the implied warranties of the mechanability and fitness for a particular purpose. That's a loaded statement. And I say that because does it mean that the county is first, manufacturer second, then RCC? It would seem, if this is the case, that we would be back at the same problem we had with Communications International. That's exactly where we are right now. Okay, I got about 2 more.
And, well,
Yes, sir.
just in 9.7, it's very rare that I have ever seen a contract of this nature that doesn't have about 8 paragraphs saying the same thing, that unless we have specifically warranted something,
Right.
don't think that it is warranted by us.
Right. Which brings me to the last part, and with that is page 8, 12, page 8, under the, I'm sorry, page 8, 12, under the identification on the general indemnity of RCC. The RCC will indemnify and hold county harmless from all and all liabilities, expense, judgment, suits, and so forth and so on. County will cooperate with RCC in its defense or settlement of the claim or suit. If Wayne County will cooperate with RCC in its deferral or settlement of the claim or suit, is that a good practice? The limitation of liability and it not to exceed the price of the equipment and how it is all built in, Borden, I'm just having a hard time understanding our limitation of liability on that paragraph.
Well, what it's saying is if the county gets sued because of something that RCC has done, and the RCC is indemnifying the county, and the county will cooperate with them if they determine they want to pay X number of dollars to settle it of their money, that the county would agree and work with them to do that. I believe one commissioner told me, I'm not saying county money, I'm saying their money. I think one commissioner told me not too long ago that it's better to settle than to sue. Well,
It'll take me to first of all, let me ask real quick, stations, is there this is a five-channel system, or is there, we had an original 10-channel system. So we understand this is a 5-channel system. Okay. And in B1, page B1, where are the specifications for all the equipment on this page? It just lists the price, or lists the system, but it doesn't give any specifications. That is page B1.
I will let Mr. Powers answer that.
Let me get to it, and then I'll see.
Here it is.
Okay, so Exhibit B, equipment list, this is the major equipment that we're going to be putting into the 6-channel radio system. The 42 Master 5 base stations, and then what we call an NSC, which is the Network Switching Center. Then it shows you your Alcatel microwaves with the updates, your shelters, and then the site equipment. I know other vendors have showed us about a 10-page. It's got how many nuts and bolts and things of that nature, but they don't show that on this one.
And the reason I ask about specifications is that was a big part of moving from the analog to digital. And with what's coming up in 2016, 17, whatever those dates are, I want to be in here to understand and to see exactly the specifications we're buying. We're on this boat for 3 more years, and you're going to flip that switch before this year is out. I just want to be able to go over the specifications so I don't have someone coming to me in the next 3 years or after the switch is cut on here in 6 or 8 months that all of a sudden I don't have anything to refer to when they start saying that you needed this or needed that.
Okay, so just so I understand, so when we talk about the Master 5 base station, when you say specifications, the cut sheets. So you'd like to see the cut sheets.
So
for
I'd like
us.
them to be a part of the contract.
Okay.
As long as we are understanding with our county and this company that we know what we bought and they know what we bought. Okay, thank you. And my last one, no, I got one. What is the transmitter power for all the stations? What's the transmitting power?
The transmitting power, right now, we're,
Either
Yeah.
one, or both. What
We-
are we licensed for?
you're licensed for 50.
Okay.
So just like, let's take, for example, the Mount Olive Tower site, we've got that at 20? 17 now, so we could run that at 17. Each one of these tower sites are adjusted when they go out and do the adjustments. Each one of those transmitters, there's 10 transmitters at every tower site. Each one of those transmitters are adjusted what they need to be at. So they're not basically, every one of them's at 100 or
Sure,
every one of them's
sure.
at 50.
Got it.
They all vary.
Okay. Phase 2 ready. Okay, got it. And my last one, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for your patience, is number, on page 10, 15.5. Very, very important for all the commissioners, I think, to understand this and understand what sovereign immunity is, and what it means. The waiver of the sovereign immunity is the county irrevocably waives the sovereign immunity with respect to this agreement and any dispute that might arise under this agreement. Specifically, the county consents to be sued for breach of contract or any other theory potentially arising out of the performance or failure under this agreement, or arising out of any breach of the county's representations or warranties of this agreement.
It's my belief that if that were not in there and they wanted to sue the county, you could not use sovereign immunity as a defense.
But we're waiving that.
Because I don't think it exists. I don't think you've lost anything because I don't think it exists. With respect to a suit under this contract, if this contract is signed.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayor.
I didn't ever finish mine, because bear with me, I only got 2 or 3, okay? Going back to the 6 channels that you were talking about, I have gotten, as recent as a few days ago, I've talked to several fire chiefs in my district that are telling me that at certain times, they're running out of space with the 10 channels we have now. If you got 3 or 4 emergencies going on in the county, you got the sheriff's department, you got all these people, then, you know, they seen the time that all 10 channels were tied up.
I ran a report just as early as Friday, and had not seen any queuing whatsoever on those 10 channels.
Explain what queuing is.
Queuing is when, if all 9 channels are busy, if it goes to the, and remember, you're working with 9 working channels. You got a 10-channel system, but 1 channel has to be the control channel, the brain.
Yeah.
It looks at that radio when you key up, says, yes, you can be on the system, go to channel whichever.
Right.
So you do 9 working channels. If every one of them's busy and you hit your button, you're gonna be queued. It's just like standing in the Walmart line waiting to pay for your bills. You got 25 lanes, 3 of them's open, you're gonna queue. You're gonna go to one that's open and wait for it. As of Friday, we were seeing some issues out in the northern part. I ran the report, there was no queuing going on. Every radio, you would think with only 9 working channels and 700 people on the system, 800, 1,000 people on the system, that you would never last. But you're looking at a 5 to 20 second key up. And I think the most I've seen so far is about 4 channels that would be simultaneously being used.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that. That's why I'm asking these questions.
Yes, sir.
I got a couple more. I saw something, one of the first things I saw when I looked at this is that the work schedule and payment schedule, which is C and D. If you look at that, the payment schedule is different from the work schedule. And my point is this: no payment should be made unless the work is complete for each one of those steps in the work schedule. In some cases, they're getting paid before the work schedule area is complete. So it needs to be tied together. The schedule of payments and the work schedule need to be tied together, because the work schedule is saying so many weeks to get this part done, but when you go to the pay schedule, it's got a date on it.
If I may, on Exhibit D on the payment schedule,
Yeah.
clearly paragraph 1 does not fall within what you're saying, because they're gonna be paid under this proposal, if this is what is signed, they're gonna get 25%
That's
to
correct.
start with.
That's correct.
All right, under
Yes.
2, when they get that 50% I think that covers what you're talking about, because it's equipment as invoiced and has been delivered to the county. So even if they have not followed the Schedule C on the work schedule, they won't invoice, and the county will not have to pay until that has been delivered and the county has received it.
I would like for that to be monitored, because they should not get paid until each part is finished.
Well,
Okay?
when they invoice it to the county, somebody that's sitting on this front row or somebody that works for them is going to check before it is given to Pam Holt to have a check cut.
Okay, and I think lastly, let me check real quick. Change orders. Yeah, in going with the payment schedule and the work schedule, when you get down to the end of the payment schedule, and we get down to the 10% of the contract price as far as the performance bond,
Yes.
I really believe we need this. I do not like that at all, because the simple reason is that if anything goes wrong after that point, RCC
like I've mentioned before, don't have that $300-some thousand liability here. It needs to stay in force 100% for the total amount of the order, as long as the project takes, whether it's 8 months, 10 months, 12 months. The performance bond needs to stay fully in force during the term of this contract. Because of what Commissioner King has already said, to help prevent possibly a reoccurrence of what we just experienced. And I'm just saying that from a standpoint, as a layman's standpoint, you know, there may be a reason. The last thing is that I'm really concerned, of course, being in manufacturing and machining, I'm really concerned about only 3 classes of training. And one of those, and I'm looking at the sheet on that, and I can't come up with it right now. It only shows that we only gonna have 3 training sessions. And to me, that's nowhere near enough for a system that's this complicated. Can somebody, Mel, do you have?
Yes, sir. The reason is 3 is for the first responders, there's really not a lot of change to what they're doing. When we cut the system over to the new, we want to see them talk. And it's really, it's pretty seamless and transparent for them as far as their operationals for the radio system. There are going to be some things, but it's not a lot. A lot of that training is more staff training than it is for the end users, for our first responders.
Okay.
There were a couple of things in the negotiation of that. It was really, as Mr. Powers has just said, is training the trainers, could be training the county staff, particularly to be able to train anybody else. But also there's one in there that was set at a different time. So anybody who wants to come to the training, but no, in other words, you can't force a volunteer fireman to come in and go to training if he doesn't have the time or the desire. Right. But supposedly, there will be sufficient people in the county trained, so if he later has a question, he can call them and they can answer the question for him. But everybody who wants to come will have the opportunity to come.
Okay. And I think maybe that might be it.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes, that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. King.
On the 50% of the contract price or of applicable subsystem equipment on that page on Exhibit D on payment schedule,
Yes.
I was going to ask this to the staff, is that if they are, first of all, when they use the equipment that's already there, and they're going to use some of it, shelve some of it, as you said, have some of it for backup, and they use what they have to use for a specific period of time according to their schedule, their work performance, then how do we know as a county that they're not using that equipment and haven't yet purchased the equipment needed? So when it gets to a certain point, you're going to go out and specifically see that that equipment is on site, in the county, on site, working, and then that payment is made. How will you know that they're not I know I got like rhetorical questions here, but if you've got, I don't want to build a clock either. If you've got a $6 million in equipment all over the place in county, and then they come in here and they're going to utilize that, how do you know that they're not utilizing that and then cash flowing their work schedule to get paid for something that yet is really not there yet, but it's something that might be 30 or 60 days out, but it's not in the county, but yet we've released the money for that?
Right. Would not, and I think Joe would jump in too, because he's been very adamant. The triggers and check marks that we talked about, like Mr. Parker was saying about the invoicing. Anytime we get an invoice for equipment, One of us are gonna go out and put eyes on everything that comes, anything that's paid for, that Ms. Holt's gonna write a check for, we're gonna have eyes on to make sure we're gonna check mark it. We did get this, we did get this, we did get that. So we'll have everything.
Let's add to that also.
Sure.
And I've sat back and tried to make some notes and, try to comfort you if I can. But this schedule there, you saw 42 Master 5s equals a 6-channel system of 100-watt design. These Master 3s we're currently using will be used in the backup system. So, but we will not use the Master 5s until we're ready. So when we cut the Master 5s on, the Master 3s will be cut off. So what I'm saying is the equipment's gonna be there in hand, that's a guarantee.
Good. And that's what we're looking for, the guaranteed performance is 100% out to the end in case the company does run in trouble. There's all over the country that companies run in trouble. They don't have the cash flow. They can't get the product on site. And if it's a new build-up, that's fine because they can't even operate. You can't even get an inspection
Yes.
unless it's a new build-up. This is not a new build-up, it's an upfit. And you're using $6 million, $10 million, but building that spread and so forth. But you've got actually probably hardware, $5 to $6 million in hardware, hard cost in equipment. So I'm just trying to protect the county, understanding that if this company comes in and they don't have the funds and they try to milk the system and get through a 60-day period, then how do we know that we're going to advance those funds and not know that it's actually in the county and in production?
And I value your comments and
Happens all the time.
that gives us strengths as well. And interesting point you made earlier that I'd like to remark on. You were talking about Harris. Is it gonna be there forever? Or are they gonna defunct, bankrupt, whatever? In '09, if I recall right, this contract was written with Tyco Corporation. Before we ever began purchasing equipment for the hardware and the infrastructure, Harris bought Tyco. The same system we got today has been enhanced and upgraded from the original GE product. Before the GE product was RCA product. GE was sold to, I believe, ComNet. ComNet was sold to Ericsson. Ericsson was sold to Maycom Tyco. Maycom Tyco was sold out to Harris. So to comfort you, I think we've got a solid product there. I feel good about that product. And every time the product's been sold to another vendor, the vendor support's always been there. So I feel good about that. I want you to comfort yourself with that as well.
I am. It's the enjoined contracted, other than just warranty, was what I was concerned about with the wordage in the contractual part. Is it and or? It's like it may or shall. It's just, are we linking up with a company, with RCC? We're also linking up with Harris.
Yes.
And where it says and Harris or Harris, then that's a huge significance within a contract illegally. It's either or. So I'm just trying to make sure that we are guarded all the way through, that they cannot come back and file suit against the county and the taxpayers are having to, pay for something that we should have looked at going in. Thank you.
Short follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Joe, Mr. Gurley, I got to follow up with you, please. I just saw something when looking at this payment schedule. Man, I need to get some contracts like this. 75% of the total price of this project is being paid 25% upfront and 50% when the subsystem equipment is just delivered to Wayne County. Now, enlighten me, how in the world can this be 75% of $3 million and change? Why would that be? Does that sound excessive? I wish I could get 75% before I ever start machining apart. I think we need to look at that, Mr. County Attorney. That's awful. They are getting 75% before they ever do anything in Wayne County.
As I understand the process, they are going to have completed the engineering, which they've already basically started to be able to make a proposal to. They're going to have to know that, and then if Marcia can get that picture back up. And I want that to be discussed with you, so you'll know exactly what that is.
Yeah.
But then you're gonna have all that work that's been done, before any of the equipment that's coming from Harris is going to be delivered here, you're going to have Mel or somebody else up there in Virginia making sure it all works. So and that's when then it comes in and they're going to check on it will have to be here based on the invoice. I think the county is protected there.
Okay, well, in my particular case, normally what I would get on something like this in my business is the cost of materials. And so, in this case, I guess it does come up to about what the purchased items that are listed here include. The purchase items listed here, is that 75% of 3 million? I'd just like somebody to take a look at it, okay? The less we can pay up front, the more skin, if you will, that RCC is gonna have in the game for a longer period of time. That's what I'm saying. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Doherty.
Questions, good questions. But the way I look at this is similar to a construction, a contractor. A contractor is going to receive dollars up front. A contractor is going to get monies for materials, and on the back end of that is when you get paid for the labor and construction and so forth. But there's got to be some formula here. I suppose one of my concerns that has been brought up, and maybe you could give me some enlightenment, on why there would be a reduction in the performance bond during the construction phase. Why would it not be all the way through? And was that part of the negotiations with RCC, or why are we eliminating 90% of the performance bond for the final 10%?
That was part of the negotiations with RCC. And it was the belief of those of us who were in those negotiations and the consultant that we had hired to help us understand and make sure that at the time that it would be reduced, that because you had the two tests, one in Virginia and then one here, you knew that all the equipment was working, that if in the coverage test you found out that there was a problem, that our consultant thought that 10% of the cost could fix that. And so the county has been told that that is sufficient to fix any problem that might be there from the time that last 10%.
Well, I understand. In other words, we would have already received all the equipment. All the equipment would be in place. All of it would actually be operating. It's a matter of the final testing as to the coverage.
Coverage testing.
Am I correct?
The coverage testing, yes, sir.
Well, in that, this is going to be issued as a bond that is going to be acquired. Would it be an exorbitant cost to RCC to extend that through the coverage testing, in your opinion?
I do not think so, because the bond is initially, the bond is going to be given at 100%. That's what the bonding company, in my opinion, is going to make them pay for.
Correct. On the front end, it's going to be at 100%.
Right.
In regards to the wording and so forth on the language, the legal language of the contract, are you satisfied with the rest of this contract, that it protects our county in this contract?
Yes.
You feel comfortable with that?
I feel comfortable.
In regards to releasing our ability to sue under, what was that?
Sovereign immunity.
Sovereign immunity.
That's a defense.
That's a defense.
Which I don't believe exists if this contract is signed.
And in my understanding also, under most contracts from private companies, they would insert that into the contract. Because certainly if not, I can see why people would not want to do any business with government entities if they were going to exercise sovereign immunity every time. Am I correct?
You are correct.
With that in mind, I think the one issue that that I think members of the board have, and I may have, and that is it possible for us to go back to RCC and say we want a performance bond for the entire time, rather than it being reduced down to 10% for the performance testing?
Yes, sir, it's possible.
It is possible for us to go back and ask that. You know, I'm happy with the contract with the exception of that one item, and I would ask that we go back to RCC and ask them to extend the performance bond through the entire contract up into performance testing. Or coverage testing, I'm sorry.
Mr. Kamara.
Mr. Borden, if you were to ask RCC to extend the bond to cover the entire time, would that arrangement cause RCC to have to incur additional expenses with, because I'm assuming that this performance bond is purchase guaranteed through some financial institution? I mean, when that schedule was set out like that, was it just for, it had something to do with dollars over time, wouldn't it? Or?
Well, there are two things, and I think in the questions that Commissioner King was asking, as well as Commissioner Daugherty has asked, when you get down to that certain percent and the liability goes down to 10%, that is the same thing, and the bond would be reduced to 10% as well. So it's a double thing. The bond probably would not cost any more to keep it on for the full amount. What the part of the negotiation was to reduce the liability of the company to 10% because of what the county believed that it was going to already know that it had gotten at least 90% of what it was paying for. So it's really a double thing, the bond plus the liability.
So it's not gonna harm RCC financially? Is that what I'm?
Well, I think what their position would be is, and their lawyer has probably told them that, is that if you can reduce your total liability when you've got done all this to 10% as opposed to 100%, you don't have that hanging out over you if the county turns around and sues you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm glad that we're getting close to a performance bond issue, is that we're covered 100% of the way, 100% of the time. Basically, it's like 95-95, just making sure that we're 100% clear all the way through and covered. My concern, again, if it's going to go back to RCC to bring us 100% coverage or 100% bond, then we need to get what they told us that we were going to get when they made their when they got up before us and gave us their the dog and pony show. And they did it again at the federal building, or the Jeffries building. And they did it in a way that they put up a big screen and they put this map up that we see here, and the public can see that. And we have the towers. And they also put up one in building, by the way. Is that up?
It is, yes, sir.
And that's in building. Now, that to me indicates that a good part of in building is covered by that picture. But if their methodology, the coverage testing, not the equipment, but if the coverage testing, and that right there indicates to me that's coverage. That's why you're showing it. You got 7 towers or 7 spots there, and you got all white except a little bit of blue, and that's coverage. It has nothing to do with equipment. It has everything to do with coverage. But they're not going to come out here and do a coverage area. Their requirement on page E2-2, in-building coverage will not be specifically tested, but the signal level as measured during automated testing, which that has nothing to do with automated testing, that's done somewhere else, will do no less than -104 dBm required to provide adequate signal, and is provided to provide the adequate signal for 8 decibel building loss. Ask RCC. We got issues in this county with in-building coverage. That's what the firefighters are saying. That's why we're all here. is that they were scared for their life in a building and having to follow a hose out. Simple as that. Simple as that. Ask RCC to come back and guarantee us indoor coverage by doing their methodology a little different. It's like going to David Ward Tech's office and say, this is what it's really worth, and they're saying, well, you guys are gonna have to decide on whether it is or not, and then they say, well, why don't you come on in the house and see? I used that methodology a few minutes ago. It's the same thing here. RCC needs to come in, they need to go in these buildings, and when it's tested, it needs to be part of their contract. And you know what, if it's gonna cost more, then what is it worth? I mean, for these firefighters to know, and it says specifically here, it will not be specifically tested. Now, can they not come, never mind about industry standards, I mean, what can they do to help us and assure us that we're gonna be safe?
And I understand industry standard, and you understand industry. I guess my question back to you, I'll try to answer your question with a question. What's your expectations for in-building coverage? What would you like for them to, do you want them to check every building or a sampling of buildings per district? What's your expectations, I guess, is what I'm asking you.
Mr. Gurley, I'm a commissioner. I'm not a firefighter. I just go to the meetings and I hear the firefighters and I hear these guys talk about their families and talk about the safety. My expectations are not going to be what theirs are, because they're in the building. My expectations, I guess, of them is to make sure that my job is to ask every question, to make sure that we can get every possible I dotted and T crossed when it comes to coverage on this radio system. The counties dropped 10 million or 9 or 10 million. Here's another million, 3 million, might be even 5 million, I don't know. But all I'm hearing, Mr. Gurley, is that they want to make sure that when they go into a building, if it's a hotel, you talked about the repeaters, you talked about the DBAs, you talked about the 800 megahertz, we've talked about these repeaters. You know what, if that's gonna be part of the system, then planning's gonna have to get in and say, what are these buildings, like we did the solar farms solar facilities. So it's just a priority, and this priority is getting these people safe in and out of a fire when they're fighting the fire. And if we go back and say, RCC, you said that you got this coverage, why don't you come in and let's do some testing? Let's go to some buildings. Let's go to Walmart. Let's go to the jail. Let's go to the hotel downtown. Let's go to the hospital. Let's go to the New Cherry Hospital and see if we have to go in. Can we, do it. And if it costs a little bit more, what is the cost? But I think we got to broach that.
Thank you. You answered my question.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Gurley, please, I'd like to ask you two questions related, just to reinforce something in my mind. Whenever you decided that the one was enough about the buildings, what you could test, did you talk, has that been in the conversation? What did your firemen say to you if you guys decided to accept what's in this contract? And I hear, did you talk to the firemen? The specific firemen, did you ask them the question, or did you share the information with them about which buildings that RCC was going to test? Did they think that was enough? I'm trying to hear what they thought when you guys talked with them about this, so that, since they're not here.
I'm gonna give you Joe's answer, and then I'll ask Mel and Brian to follow up. I did not talk to all of the public safety community. As I ran across individuals, I would speak to them about the contract. I would speak to them about what our expectation was, and as I mentioned earlier, this testing methodology is an industry standard. And then if we get back to the tax analogy, if we would get to an area where it wouldn't meet that neg 104, then we would go to that particular area specifically and go into the interior of that building and do a test there. But to answer your question, I have talked to individuals, as random as I see them, and talked to them, and that was acceptable that we had a methodology like that. And I will turn it to Mel and Brian and let them speak who they may have talked to.
far as the presentations that you guys had that Tuesday here, that same presentation was presented to all the fire chiefs in the county. So they've heard all the same information. The majority.
They heard the same information from RCC that we heard.
That's correct.
So they are, whenever it was discussed that with some of these buildings will be excluded, they heard that.
Yes, sir.
What was their take on it?
Well, you know, in the firefighter world, they, you know,
It rained?
they don't like that. They want to be able to talk in every single building. But I think the majority understand that they're not ever gonna talk in every single building within Wayne County.
Okay.
That's why we have procedures in place, and even with the upgrade, regardless of what we do, the counties, or I say the counties, our stance as an office will be always on the fire scene, anytime you're operating within a structure, to operate on the VTAC channels. That way they have back and forth on fireground operations. And that's a national standard that the national NFPA has put out that says, you do this. If you need to get contact back with communications, then you get back on the system and call for
All
more
right.
help or whatever.
So if I hear you, if I understand your answer right, the firefighters would love to have that maximum, but Mr. Acock said a little earlier, and I thought that's what he was talking about, was that Wayne County could not afford to have that absolute 100%. Is that the area we're talking about? We can't afford to have that absolute they're talking about, but we're taking the best absolute that we can probably afford is on the table. And the reason I ask that is, I do not want us to, I want us to go have RCC to come back here and answer everything they need to answer. But if you've already covered that ground with your firefighters in the field, and they understand what can happen and can't happen with the equipment that you guys are saying that we can use, then I just want to, I'm not saying that we don't need to spend the time, gentlemen, but I don't want us to be redundant and have the company to come and spend time talking about what you all have, or what the firefighters on the ground have already heard one time. And that our chairman said that we probably cannot afford.
Well, you know, there again, you have to define what you can afford. One thing I think is important, Mr. Borden, for everybody to know, when RCC come in and was asked to look at this, and I think they expressed this at the meeting when they kind of showed what they had come up with. When they were asked to look at the coverage, these specifics were not given to them. So they were told we needed better coverage on the ground and we needed more in-building coverage. That's what we were being told by the end users, and that's what we told them. So that's what they've designed. What they've designed does exactly what they were asked to do. Does it give you, is it gonna give you coverage inside the jail? It's probably gonna help it, but it's not gonna be guaranteed in that building. It's not gonna be guaranteed in Walmart. It's not gonna be guaranteed in my metal shop behind my house. Although I got coverage in there right now, and when it's upgraded, I'm more than likely gonna have coverage in there then. But that's not a guaranteed area. An 8 dB building, when you have to really define an 8 dB building, because depending on the construction of it, depending on if you put a metal roof, shingles, whatever you got,
But I don't want- I don't
all
want-
that goes in a lot of detail.
All right, let me ask you this question. I don't want to oversimplify it. But is it to reach that optimum, perfect level you're talking about, does it call for spending time to redesign something, or does it call for buying a more powerful piece of equipment?
You're talking about total different design than what they've presented.
So it's got to, okay, it's, that's why I don't want to oversimplify it, because I hear us say that it's a, go ahead.
Mr. Bell, regardless of what type of system you have, you gotta have procedures in place in order to cover you. You know what I mean, when you go out, because I have been out on calls where you had two people in the same area. One radio work and one radio doesn't work.
Yes.
I mean, I have never seen a radio, and I carried radios for 40 years. I've never seen a radio system that worked 100% of the time in any building that you go into. I've never seen that happen before.
That's true.
I have a question, just as a follow-up. Talking about this coverage, if we take out all the factories and shopping malls and all the small and large stores and so forth and so on, we've been hearing for 2 years of the liability on the county. We gotta do something. We gotta do this, we gotta do that. If we don't have coverage in these, what I call really important buildings in Wayne County, how much is our liability reduced? The second question is that Mr. Camardi is correct. It's been said that we cannot afford coverage for all these buildings except for a bank vault or whatever. What I'm saying is that maybe we can't afford not to have it. Because has anybody looked into the actual costs, and has anybody looked into neighboring counties? Neighboring counties are having the same issues we are with the upgraded system, am I right?
You're correct.
Okay, is anybody that you know of gotten coverage to cover all buildings except for bank vaults and so forth? Who do you know?
None that I'm aware of.
Has anybody inquired?
Joe, come back up to the.
I have read through trade magazines, the same situations are out there, it's nationwide.
Okay, but there are some counties that have solved the problem. Is that right?
Can you give us those counties? I mean, we don't know of any. I don't know of any.
I'm just asking, do you know of any?
To exceed the 104 we're talking about,
So you can have complete coverage except in a bank vault?
I don't know of a county.
Okay.
I'm not saying there's not, Mr. Mayor, but I do not know of one.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Doherty.
I think we could go on for a long time. I agree that there is no radio communication system that's gonna give us 100% of the time, 100% everywhere. And undoubtedly, there is, very clear, there's gonna be coverage gaps in certain buildings. And I think that this board has recognized that the cost is prohibitive for us to bring about what no other county has, and that is coverage 100% of the places. Again, RCC has indicated to us, the map's on the screen, map's given to us here, and it's saying that this is the indoor coverage that will be available under the new system. Guaranteed. And with that in mind, the only thing that I want is some teeth in the guarantee. So I would ask that we go ahead and authorize our chairman to execute this contract with one condition, and that is that our attorney negotiate the best performance bond that he may to give us as much coverage under the protection under the performance bond. Definitely more than the 10% on the back end. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Let Mr. Mayor get Mr. King.
Discussion.
Discussion.
You want to wait? Discussion, it doesn't matter. Go ahead.
I think it's important enough that we wait. I don't want anybody to say they were left out. While we're waiting, either for Mel, Brian, or Joe, or all three, I made a statement that the county couldn't afford it, and I just need to back up that. Do y'all have any ballpark figure? I mean, the equipment is out there that can be put on at each building to make it work. Have y'all got any ballpark figure on what that would cost per building or per unit, or just, and I'm not trying to back into a corner now. If you don't know, just tell me you don't know.
No, each one of these BDAs have to be designed and manufactured per the building specs and the radio specs.
So you'd have to build it for that particular building?
Yes, sir. They are
Okay.
designed and spec for that application.
But they are not cheap?
No, sir.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. King?
Mr. Mayor's back. So what I'm hearing from Mr. Daugherty is that $10 million didn't work. $3 million may not work. And all you want to do is get a performance bond. When in fact, we've talked about firemen deciding which building they're gonna go in because they are knowing up front that they don't have the coverage, or they might have the coverage, or they do have the coverage. It's not all about money. It's about these firefighters going into these buildings and knowing when they get there on the site, is this building gonna be okay for me to get into? It's plain and simple. Thank you.
Any other discussion?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Pate?
not to drag this on any longer, as we've been talking for hours now. I did talk to a fire chief last night about this coverage issue. And they indicated that they were looking to buy a repeater to go on their truck. Have you heard of this? And he told me that would most likely work, where they would have coverage inside the building. And the cost of that was $2,500, which I think is pretty cheap in terms
Well,
of.
for $2,500, I don't know where it's gonna find
Okay,
that.
well, I'm just telling
But
you.
anyway, yes, it's repeaters on the trucks, or,
Is this something that he
or
was dreaming about, or is this
another
something?
and when I say that, you know, as you upgrade the system, or you got holes in the system where it doesn't work as well in this area of my district as it does over here, there are options out there. There've always been those options. There's repeaters that may give you a little bit more coverage in there. There's repeaters out there for the conventional side to talk back to the system. So there's options out there for them if they have that problem in their district to be able to solve the problem, so to speak. There are other options out there, just like the BDAs for the buildings.
I just know some of them are looking at it.
Yes, yeah, and I know several have mentioned they were interested in looking at those.
Any other discussion?
Can we amend the motion, Mr. Chairman? Is it proper to do that?
Mr. Parker?
You could certainly you could move to amend it, clearly.
I'd like to amend the motion that we require RCC to come back in and do their methodology a little different than what they're used to. That for the safety of Wayne County firefighters and police and sheriff, that we have them to come in and do field testing within the buildings that we, as commissioners, working with staff, indicate the buildings that we would like tested. That's my amendment.
Mr. Chairman. Guys, help me out here. Don't I understand, or did I not understand, that we are in actuality going to have field testing? It specifies in here that we're going to already have field testing, where in fact it specifies who will be there for the testing. Am I correct? Would you give me some elaboration on that?
Yes,
Use the
Commissioner
contract,
Daugherty.
please.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, if he could use the contract, it's E-2-2, under coverage testing methodology.
And while he's looking for that, I think that you're talking about coverage testing, not the field testing.
That's correct. Coverage, what we're looking at. What they've told us is covered.
Mel, could I possibly get you to enlighten me in regards to the all testing that's in the contract? Let's put it that way. What testing is in the contract? There's field testing and there's coverage testing.
Yes, sir. And to understand field and I said the same thing, Mr. Parker and I had the same conversation, he was sitting right next to me, and I told you, field testing is misleading, because field testing is the equipment, has nothing to do with the way the radio is going to talk out in the field. Field testing is equipment testing. So when we when we sign the contract and get started on the enhancement and the upgraded radio system, we'll make that order. Harris is going to build our equipment. When they build the equipment, they're going to stage it in Lynchburg, Virginia. They're going to hook it up. They're going to have it working just like it was in Wayne County, but it'll be in Lynchburg, Virginia. We will go up, our staff, as well as RCC and the Harris engineers, and we will go through a document. You see on E1 that field testing for Wayne County. Well, this is about a quarter of what we'll do at Harris for their field testing. We'll go through each one of these little tests for the equipment. Once we're satisfied 100% the field testing in Lynchburg, Virginia, once we are satisfied and say, yes, it passes Lynchburg or Harris's field test, we're good. They're going to start packaging that equipment, and it'll start coming to Wayne County. Once RCC, they get the delivery, they invoice it, we go out, us as a staff. We make sure that equipment is exactly like it's supposed to be. It's invoiced, it's correct. They will put it together. Once they finish, then we will do another identical field test, just like we did at Lynchburg. It won't be as exotic as Lynchburg, because there's a lot of things we don't have to worry about. We will do that all over again. Our staff, along with RCC, will sit down and go through each one of these checks again to make sure that the equipment is working perfect. And once we say, yes, that equipment is, this tower site's talking to that tower site, this master file's talking to that master file, the multi-couplers are working fine, the filters and the cans are tuned just like they're supposed to be, everything's at 100%, then we're going to sign off on the field testing. Okay, that is the field test. Field test is equipment. So once we finish that, we know that equipment is perfect, it's running, we own it, it's Wayne County's equipment, then we're going to start the coverage testing. Okay, the coverage testing, as you see, is broke up into two items. You have what they call a burr test. That is, some companies call it a Panther test. Some people call it just an automated test, but it is called a burr test, a bit error rate. Anybody that knows digital knows that it's nothing but zeros and ones. That's what digital is. They're bits, little bits going back and forth. And so what this burr test does is it tests those bits going back and forth to make sure that we're getting all those bits. If you go into an area and you got a 0 to a 2, that means all your little zeros and little ones are making it. That's a 2. That's a pass. Then from 2.1 to 5 on that burr test, this is that automated Panther test that people call it. That says, yeah, it's good. We've lost a few little packets here and there. We need to do a quality test, an audio quality test. And we write it down, it shows it on that automated test. But then you might have one or two areas that it was a 5.1 and over. That's an automatic fail. You only had to do the quality test, audio quality, because it's not going to pass. You've dropped most of your packets. There's no sense in it.
Excuse me, can I interrupt you? Now, in that test you're talking about there, that's an automated test, but it's actually a signal that's being sent in or sent into the area, and you're testing how much of that signal you're receiving.
What it's actually doing is, as you know, if we could cut X-ray vision on and see RF, we wouldn't see each other.
Right.
There's so much RF. And what they're doing, they've got a computer sitting here. They've got a little antenna dish up top, and it is constantly grabbing that RF signal, and it's bringing it into the computer, and it's measuring. As they drive, it's measuring it constantly.
Okay.
And it's pulling this burr test, this bit error rate test.
Marty.
Ma'am,
Yes, sir.
I believe this morning that you all have given us the best of whatever you believe this equipment will do, and the best that you set up to monitor everything that we're gonna do. And I'm sitting here thinking about this, gentlemen. We could have RCC to come back down here and on paper promise everything. But the success of this is going to depend on the three gentlemen that's sitting right out here in front of us. Because if you come, all the things I've heard, if we're concerned about the equipment being here and we know we have it before we invoice and spend money, it's gonna be on you guys a ticket. You're gonna go to Virginia to see this equipment hooked up and run. You can get halfway back down here and something could happen and it might not, but you guys are telling us you're gonna be there to see it.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. King, we are gonna have to, this morning, because we could ask this 18 different ways, I think this morning, we're gonna have to rely on the fact that they're going to follow this path inch by inch, cinch by cinch, and make sure that what we say we're getting, and they gonna sign off on it. And we can ask them to bring it in and go back over with us and say, you're at the 25% point, you're at the 50% point, if we feel like we need to look over their shoulders. But I don't believe that bringing everybody back in, right down to that 10% you're talking about, because you could ask them to change it to anything, and they may agree. But out in the field, when it starts to be put together, it's gonna take you gentlemen to guarantee that Wayne County is getting what we asked for. And if it doesn't happen, you're gonna have to tell us in time for us as a body to do something about it. So, based upon that motion, just a minute, that Mr. Daughtry made, let's authorize the chairman to sign and move on.
Maybe we should send the expert county commissioners to watch.
To watch with the
Question,
Mr. King.
See, they know so much.
The issue that I'm discussing is not about what you just brought up. My issue is the coverage and the contract and the methodology and how this will be tested and what we're going to be responsible for and what we're going to be able to confidently tell our firefighters and sheriff department and police what they're getting, and assuring them that we went to all ends to make it happen. And my suggestion only was to have RCC to change somewhat their methodology and have someone or a team from their company to come in and just do field testing. I am looking at the contract. Some commissioners are asking the staff. I'm just looking at what I've been presented. I'm looking at the materials here presented to me, and it has in here the payment schedule that you've just spoken about, Mr. Cromartie. It's got the work schedules we've gone over. It's got the equipment list. We've talked about that and talked about the scope of work. Now all we're doing is looking at this map, and I'm trying to finish up in my mind, if that is the coverage that we're being presented and that's indoor coverage, then when I look over here where it says field acceptance test that a commissioner asked about, maybe it was Mr. Daughtry, about the equipment test or coverage test, I'm getting into we've talked about the manufacturer's warranty and Harris, we've done all of that. My concern, this commissioner is concerned about the coverage acceptance test and what it says here as far as exhibit 2-E-2 is the coverage testing methodology. It talks about the coverage area. The coverage area is a geographic area where the upgrade system will provide communications that meet or exceed the specific channel performance the criteria there. And we've talked about the DAQ 3.4. And what we're seeing is that coverage right there. But then as I go down where it says coverage area requirement, it talks about the building coverage defined where the portable radio, when inside a structure, can communicate reliably with the system. It's real simple. This is in the contract. This is what we're agreeing to, and this is wordage that's very simple. And we are saying today, if we sign this contract, then that's what we set by. But here, if you turn the page, it's plain and simple. In-building coverage will not be specifically tested. And all I'm asking is my commissioners to amend the motion, not to just do 100% on the performance bond, but ask RCC to come in and do some testing that might be a little outside their methodology, but to satisfy me and the commission, I would hope, is that they come and do that. That was my, and I call for question on that. Because that was the amendment.
Mr. Mayor.
I'll call for question.
It's, okay. Look, no matter if, I just heard a comment that a couple of commissioners need to probably be involved since we're experts. Let me say something here. Okay, let me say something here. And if you've ever been to a Firemen's Association meeting in the last 2 years, like I have been on this board, you will understand that this is not a laughing matter. If you're a volunteer fireman and you're in a burning building and you can't talk outside and you've got a family, you got a wife and 6 children at home, this is not a laughing matter, folks. This is serious.
And what I'm saying is that we don't need to take this lightly. I don't care who we are. I'm asking the questions. The reason I'm asking these questions is that the fire chiefs in my district have demanded that I ask these questions, and the citizens. So what I'm saying is that we don't need to take this lightly. This is very serious. And so if it takes from now till 4 o'clock to get out what we need to get, I want to go on record as a commissioner saying that I cared. I asked the questions that needed to be asked. And that's what I'm doing. I have that right as a commissioner. So, yeah, we need to move forward, but we need to do it in a way, because the News Argus, again, is exactly right in yesterday's editorial. They are looking, and the citizens are looking to the commissioners to get it right this time. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm asking the questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, if Mr. King will allow me to ask a question before we vote. Mel, I want to get this straight in my mind. You know, we're talking about field testing and coverage testing, which actually turns out to be two different things.
Two separate things. Misleading, but two.
Is RCC going to come to Wayne County and do coverage testing?
Yes, sir. The coverage
So
testing.
they'll be checking out buildings that
Coverage
that
testing.
we're talking about?
Coverage
Or
testing.
are we just talking about the area? They're not looking at any specific buildings? You see what I'm asking? You understand what I'm asking?
The county will be split into squares, or what they call bins. Okay, every bin's gonna be tested. They're gonna do the automated test. They're gonna run around with that little antenna up. It's gonna be monitoring everything for that bit air rate test, that bird test. That's the first thing. Once that's done, it's gonna give them an idea. When they look from 0 to infinity on this, anything over 5.1, they're gonna know is bad. That's an automatic fail.
So they will know which buildings
This,
will not
on the
work.
automated test, the driving, this
They
isn't
will know.
walking, this is an automated drive test. You're in a car with a laptop in the seat. Now, those areas that get 2 or better, 0 to 2, we know that's a good area. All the others, we're gonna do a DAQ, or the audio quality test, okay? When you look at it, if you've got an area, just like the map we're showing up here, if you look at the very center Goldsboro site, that's site 1, or the Goldsboro site, they're guaranteeing that you're gonna have a level of neg 104 or better in that area, okay? They're saying if I've got a neg 104 in this area, then I'll have in-building coverage on an 8 dB structure.
And they will be physically on the ground coming here doing that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
That's what
And,
I'm
it's actually to the county's advantage the way the contract's written, because it can't be them against us. We have 3 county people to their 2 people. So we can override if they say, oh, that was a DAQ of 2 and 2, and we can say, no, it was a DAQ of 1 and 1. We outnumber them.
Did they
So
do
they
this last
ensure.
time? Did
Sir?
they do this last time?
Did
See,
who
I
do what?
this, Ride around and do the testing?
Yes.
Yeah, but I think what Mr. Pay, I'm trying to understand, he's asking, do they go in the buildings and do the testing? Because on this methodology, they're not going
No.
in the buildings.
They're not gonna go in, no, sir. Not on the
That's-
contract.
So
They're
they
not
really
gonna
won't
go.
know whether
They will not.
they'll be able to penetrate that building or not.
No, what they'll do is tell you that it's a neg 104. If it shows neg 104 or better, now, if it's in that white area, and I talked to Ken and I talked to Randy about this, if it's a neg 104 and we're saying by Goldsboro site, that white area, and somebody calls and says, I don't have any coverage in my building, we're gonna go look. RCC and Wayne County, we'll go look and look at their building. Now, if it's a aluminum sided house with a metal roof on it, that's not an 8 dB building. And you can look at it the same way. My father-in-law was the same way. He had good cell phone coverage up in Siler City where he lives. Greatest coverage in the world, and then he went and put a metal roof on top of his house. Guess what happened to his coverage? It died. Same thing here. And we'll go out. If it's a 8 dB building, we're going to test it. And we're going to see what do you have inside.
If you have a building like that that's not receiving coverage, what are the options at that point?
Well, if it's in the guaranteed coverage area, they're going to have to fix it.
Okay.
I couldn't tell you how to fix it. No, sir, I don't know. You have options. It might be a BDA, I don't know, but there are options. Just like we did at the jail, we've got an exterior, we got a Yagi up on the building that's pointed back to pick up signal.
Discussed it so much now, Mr. Doherty, I need for you to repeat your.
Well, actually, he's got an amendment.
Well, do we need your amendment after, so you're still not on the same, because the question that they answer for him does not answer your question?
Mr. Doctor. I mean, Mr. Cromartie, I'm sorry, my amendment's the way it is.
Read the amendment back, the amendment, Marshall, please.
Require RCC to come back and do the methodology differently for the safety of the county and to do coverage testing with staff on the buildings which we desire to be tested.
Mel.
Can I just say one thing? We did discuss this with RCC about, testing building, and there will be a cost addition to that, and I know you said that was fine, I just want to make sure everybody
Know what it
understood
is, but we need to
that
get
it
it
was going
back
to be a cost.
so you guys can discuss it, so we don't do it today, we can, whatever the motion was.
So you all think that's something that's valuable to be done? I just wanna know what we're voting.
Sorry.
I'm not debating whether you need, but I just wanna know from you all.
I'm not,
It will
I'm
help.
gonna speak personally, I'm not gonna speak for them, but no, I don't think it's really necessary. We've got a guaranteed coverage up here, so I don't think it is. Me personally, as a fire chief for 17 years with the county.
That's what I want.
Any other discussion? A motion on the floor and a motion with an amendment. Pleasure to board.
You vote on whether.
On the amendment.
On the amendment.
Can I just clear up for the media what the amendment is, please?
Yes, sir.
Madam Clerk,
Do you want me to read it again?
I don't think they really understand what the amendment is.
Okay. To require RCC to come back and do the methodology differently for the safety of the citizens and to do coverage testing with the staff on the buildings that we determine need to be tested.
That's correct. Coverage testing, which will be in building in reference to, I'll give you a reference point. Page E-2-2, that's bullet point number 3, where it says in-building coverage will not be specifically tested. It's in the contract. But the signal level as measured during automated testing will be no less than the 104 dBm required to provide adequate signal for an 8 dB building loss. I don't like the in-building coverage will not be specifically tested. That is this whole discussion.
I've got a question for Mr. Parker. We've got a amendment, a motion for an amendment and a motion. Do we need to go back and undo everything we've already done? I mean, do we need to forget about the resolution that's already been passed and the budget amendment that has already been passed? Do we need to undo that and just start all over?
I would not think so. As I understand, the first motion that Mr. Daughtry made was to, after all the discussion, was to authorize me to go back and negotiate as to the size and length of the bond, how long that was going to go. And then, as I understand and that if I would, the best I could get, then you would sign it. What I understand the motion that Commissioner King has made is that he would like RCC to come back in and to have a different methodology as to the way that testing was going to be done and with the specific buildings.
For in-building, yes.
For in-building coverage.
In-building coverage.
And so, So, yeah, I think it would be appropriate first to vote on the amendment to the motion that Commissioner Daugherty has made. Thank you.
Okay, I have a motion from Mr. King for the amendment. There's no other discussion. What's the pleasure of the board? Show you sign right hand. Three to four vote.
You want to take the negative vote? You'd ask who was against it.
Any opposition, show sign of right hand.
Mr. Chairman, if I may be presumptuous, I'm not sure that the staff over here has completely explained what the guarantee on these maps are. And I think it's very important for the entire board and the people in Wayne County, the citizens, to know what the guarantee is. Secondly, for reason, and if that could be done today, for reasons other than this discussion, I'm going to recommend that you do not adjourn this meeting, but that you recess it, and I can get the information from RCC, and I would feel more comfortable at bringing it back and letting the whole board know what it is than somebody saying, well, you didn't negotiate it very well. I'd like you to know what I've been able to do with the negotiation. But I'm not positive, and I know the hour is getting late, that the staff has told you exactly what the guarantee is on this map, and I think it's very important for the board to know that.
A question?
Mr. King.
A question for council. If they're going to do that, can they refer to the contract as far as coverage? If that's the coverage that we've been discussing, council, then what part of the contract does that particular coverage and that the staff will bring for us? What does part of the contract or will they be discussing?
That is on page E23. That's very small, and I had asked that we be able to blow it up so people could see it better, the people that are looking on the TV, that they could be able to see the coverage.
Yes. And if I can follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
A follow-up question is that is exactly what we have just defeated in this board, is the E-2-2 with the next page. Is this coverage E-2-3, which is this coverage that the staff will be discussing? So as we move forward, I would ask that the staff, again, reiterate the in-building coverage will not be specifically tested, if that's in fact what the staff is going to bring for us, is the coverage methodology. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Mr. Powers.
Give me just 1 second to find
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Mr. Daugherty.
Well, maybe I can clear this up a little bit, because I kind of equate this as to an FM signal going to my FM receiver.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm going to equate that. And if I am in a structure of a certain design, I'm able to get a pretty strong signal. But if I go into a building that has larger walls and so forth, I may not get a signal in there.
Yes, sir.
And so if I'm understanding this, and the reason I made the motion I did, is that the standard used in testing is in fact the standard we're using here, and this is the same standard used everywhere.
Yes, sir.
Am I correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. King.
It might be the standard all over the world, but what is the standard for Wayne County? Standard for Wayne County is that the firefighters, the sheriff, and the police in this county have been put through an uncertainty of in-building coverage for 2 years. As I mentioned before, we've already spent $10 million, and it still don't work. We're gonna spend another $3 million. We've been guaranteed that it'll work, as you just mentioned. That's guaranteed coverage. And all we're doing is asking, or I'm asking, and 2 other commissioners, is that why doesn't RCC come and take their expertise with their radios, Harris radios, has great warranties, great partnership. And why can't they go in the building and say, hey, can you hear me? You haven't even asked them. You don't even know what it's gonna cost. If you do know what it's gonna cost, you haven't given us the cost factor. Point is that 3 commissioners would like to see this company come in, get into a building that we hear from our fire chiefs in those districts, mainly the city of Goldsboro, and those big buildings outside, like the Cherry Hospital, Wayne Memorial, and tell us, this is what you're gonna need. These repeaters are gonna have to be bought. This is how you're gonna have to factor in the future of Wayne County. Because you're investing not just 10 million, you're investing in 3 more million. And in 2016, you may have something else to come along that may cost us 2 or 3 or 4 million. So when you start talking about the coverage, let's be real specific and let's get in the building. Because I think that's what the firefighters and the sheriffs and the deputy sheriffs and the police, I think that's what they really want to know. They know we got 95 outside. But if that's guaranteed inside, and I got to sign a contract on it, then, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to see the in-building coverage explored in depth by RCC.
Bill, explain it to us, the map, the best that you
Yes,
can.
What you're looking at, the white areas are the guaranteed areas. That is areas that they are saying are going to have signal levels of neg 104 or higher. So that is their guaranteed coverage. At a neg 104, it gives you, by Harris's standards, coverage in an 8 dB building. So they're saying that neg 104 or higher dB, you're going to have coverage. Now, the blue is going to be any signal level less than a neg 104. You still have outdoor coverage, but they cannot guarantee that you'll have in-building coverage because we're looking at a neg 8 dB building. So if it's high, if it's less than neg 104, then they cannot guarantee that you'll have reliable coverage in building. So they're telling you that everything you see white, they're guaranteeing you a neg 104, which will give you in-building coverage. And Commissioner King, I did ask RCC about would they test inside the buildings, and I apologize, I did not get a price from them. They said it'd be very expensive if they had their guys going into every structure testing. I did do some research online, pulled contracts out. I talked to another county that we've talked to a lot, and they basically, this is how they done their methodology on in-building coverage.
Well,
so that was
thank
tested.
you.
I did not give you, I didn't get a price.
Thank you so much. And while you're at it, if you do happen to ask them, would you ask them about schools also? Because we have rural schools, big buildings, a lot of kids, and certainly want the school kids to be able to be safe when the fireman shows up. So let's test the schools too. Thank you.
Mel,
Yes, sir.
in your, I won't say professional opinion, but you've had about as much schooling on the radio system in the last couple of 3 years as anybody I know of. Once we get the system up to where we've got the guarantee now, the white area, just your gut feeling, or feelings from Harris and RCC, and anybody else, Mr. Hamlin, whoever, do you think that what they're guaranteeing could possibly be greater than what they're showing or less than what they're showing? I mean,
I'm very optimistic that it's going to be greater than what they're showing. I'm being optimistic that I think it will be. We've not only run this through our Mr. Bob Hamlin, which is the consultant hired, but the engineer at Harris also looked at it, and also Blaska, is that how you say his name? Joe Blaska, which is the engineer. He's out of the state of Washington. He is supposedly one of the lead simulcast engineers, and he has looked at this system and said that it should do exactly what they're showing.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
Just to follow it. But these tests that we're looking at here these are the same tests that we used the first time on the first contract. The field testing and all that's the same, or the order is the same. You went up to Harris, I believe, and did the testing up there, just like you're gonna do here with RCC, is that correct?
We
And-
did we went up there and looked at it staged.
Yeah.
There was not I don't remember doing a big field acceptance test. We actually went up there, they said, here's Wayne County's equipment. I think I rode and Brian rode up there, and looked at it. It was nice, little lights were flashing on it. But we did not do any kind of field test on that equipment. When we got it back we started putting it back together, they did do a field acceptance test here. At that time, Brian and myself were involved with the radio system. And we did the field acceptance test on that, and the equipment worked fine.
And there's another caveat there. The test we talked about in Lynchburg is actually a factory test. We were not involved in the factory test originally with the first contract, or we are with this one as a participant just to view. We won't have no input. The courtesy there from RCC, they've invited us as the customer to go along with them out of courtesy.
And follow up, now, if I remember correctly, even after you go through all that and get everything into Wayne County, your system is only gonna work as good as how your towers are set up.
By the engineering.
Your design of your towers. Now, if I remember correctly before, one of the biggest issues we've got now, and I think we still do, is that whenever you're running a fine line on that 8 decibel, for example, whether you can receive or not, that the actual direction that the wind blows has an effect on whether you receive or not. Is that not correct?
Weather does have an issue. It has a bigger issue on the Master 3s that we're using now. The Master 5s have more leniency on it because it is linear simulcast modulation.
Right, so
Onward.
when you're looking at this coverage area here, what conditions are these under? 70 degrees sunshine, or?
I don't think that type of weather has anything to do with it.
Huh?
We're looking at, I would say severe weather. You do have some inversions. There is some, I cannot say that word. Say it. Troposphere, God.
Yes.
It's one of them weather words I just cannot pronounce.
Well,
There are some issues that will affect it, but it's gonna affect any radio system, regardless if it's RVHF or 800 or any other system. It's going to affect it. It's just one of those that we cannot control.
Mr. Chairman, would you take a very short break? The DVD is running out. We need to change it.
Yes, sir, let's take a 10